Hey guys, welcome to part 4 of What If Naruto Became Serious During Chunin Exam. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Chapter 13. Phantom. Tsunade looked on in trepidation as she held her anxiety back in front of Konoha's hospital. The reason being, she was afraid that she had to confirm a death that her mind would practically not accept such grim tidings. 3 days ago, she had received a report that Uzumaki Naruto was killed in the midst of his kidnapping. The culprit was none other than Akatsuki. Specifically, Uchiha Itachi and his partner, Hoshigaki Kisame, were the one responsible for this whole mess. She had to hold back her anger. It would not be fitting for the leader of the village to look so emotionally distraught. She had been asked by Kotetsu and Homura to at least try and perform an autopsy as she was the best in the business. But being the one to perform such a thing was cruel even for her. She had seen enough loved ones die to practically lose it. She had succumbed herself into the paperwork of dealing with the village. Her mind was so laden in distraught that she had tried to immerse herself in her work, saying to herself that she had to mentally prepare for this event. She could not take it if the person she saw as her son would die so abruptly. She had to be ready, she had to strengthen herself. Jiraiya had come back a few hours ago, furious and out of his own thoughts. He was less reserved on what happened and had stormed out of the office to vent his rage outside the village. Tsunade had envied her former teammate. He was much freer to let out his emotions than she ever could. But she had to be strong, she had to make sure that she stood up to the examples of the previous Hokage, and like Naruto, she couldn't back out of a promise she had made to herself and to the loved ones that perished before her. Kakashi had the unfortunate job to be the messenger for Iruka. As she finally mustered the courage to enter the building, she was met with the gazes of the hospital staffers who were looking at her and soon went back to their duties as Tsunade wordlessly made her way to the morgue. The sound of her footwear hitting the tiles were all that they could hear as the doors to the morgue were opened with an audible creak before closing behind her, blocking anyone from view as she made her way to the dead boy that was formerly known as Uzumaki Naruto. Yakiniku Q. Everyone was quiet. Shikamaru noticed his peers looking much more somber than usual, and some were even missing. He noted that Sasuke was nowhere to be seen, as well as Hinata. But aside from the missing 2 people, everyone was in attendance. Even Lee, who was discharged just recently, was present. He was out of his crutches now, and he walked fine. Out of all the people in this circle though, the one who looked most distraught was Sakura. Her hair was disheveled. 3 days of losing sleep had made her eyes baggy and puffy from the traumatic events of the past 3 days. Her hands were on her head, stroking back her bangs as she held it in a tight grip. Ino was trying her best to console her. Sakura, please, don't take Naruto's death as your fault. We've been over this. Naruto wouldn't want you to blame yourself for something you had no control over. Choji nodded as he said, Ino's right, Sakura, don't lose sleep over this. We're all here for you and Sasuke. Sakura could only reply in a bitter laugh, you wouldn't be saying those words if you have all heard what Naruto said to us before he. Sakura had once more cried as she held her eyes, the things that I had done, the things that I tried to accomplish, all of those were of my own selfish accord. Even in the end, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't save a teammate, and now Sasuke has decided to close himself off further and further away from us. That idiot didn't even curse me in his last breath. Didn't even utter a bad word to me in his final moments. All I could think about was how effectively useless and cruel I was, and how futile it was for all my training and knowledge that I couldn't save him. I should have been more empathic with him. I should have tried to understand him. Shikamaru scowled at this. What did you learn, Sakura? Sakura couldn't say a word as she continued to cry. You learned about his greatest secret, didn't you? Shikamaru asked. To this, the rest of his peers turned to him with a questioning look. Sakura nodded. Shikamaru, what are you on about? Kiba asked, beating Ino to the punch as Shikamaru sighed and closed his eyes. It would be useless to keep hiding this from you, seeing as Naruto is gone. But I have to ask you to keep your heads at an even level. I don't want you to all look at this village in a bad light, because this would be an insult to our friend, who despite his status, loved this village deeply and called it his only home. This is my only request. They all looked at each other, wondering what Shikamaru was talking about, but decided to nod anyway. Make sure you mean it then. Shikamaru commented as he looked upwards. I learned his secret 2 months ago, during the invasion. Asuma-sensei had accidentally stumbled on his words, and from there, I had to piece every little bit of information together, thanks to Shino's dad. Then, Shikamaru began his tale. He was concise, to the point, and spoke out factually, thinking of the details that he could vaguely remember as the minutes go by, reliving that moment in hell 2 months ago. He had then grabbed his glass and drank the water as he sighed once more. Many of his peers looked on in solemnity and surprise as Shikamaru told them about the status of Naruto being a Jinchuriki, a person who was essentially the village's deterrent for war. Ino had turned to her teammate and asked, "How long have you known this? Why keep this secret from us?" "Because Naruto was afraid that we would all treat him the way the adults did when we were younger," Shikamaru answered. At least that's what he could come up with, trying to rationalize Naruto's actions about being the container of the Kyuubi. "Nobody deserves such an unlawful treatment," Lee commented, looking down as his fists were shaking with rage. "Calm yourself, Lee. It would not do well for us to stir trouble in the village," Tenten reprimanded by firmly holding her teammate by the shoulder. "I completely understand you, but this is deplorable. I understand, but we must remain calm." "Why is this?" "Because, as Shikamaru has stated, lashing out against the village would be an insult to the memory of our fallen comrade," Shino replied, pacifying the more emotional members of their little group. Kiba scoffed at this. "To be treated like shit is something I don't just let go, lying down. Naruto may have been forgiving, but I sure as hell am not." It was then that Choji spoke out against Kiba's opinion. He knew he was just as affected as much as anybody was in the room, but he knew Shikamaru was right. "Kiba, listen to yourself. What's a genin supposed to do against someone like Asuma-sensei or Kurenai-sensei? Do you think that they would be in on this just because Naruto was mistreated? Do you think you'll be able to look at Naruto in the eye one day if you try to make things your way and suddenly get killed? No, you won't. You'll be swatted like a fly." Kiba stood from his seat and looked at Choji with a scowl. "I dare you to say that again to my face, fat." "That's enough." Neji had decided to cut in. Both Choji and Kiba had to stand down. They both respected Neji for being a genin strong enough to put them in their place. "I understand all your concerns, but we all need to look at this tragedy as a reminder of how fleeting our lives are as shinobi. Naruto fought well, but even then, he was killed by those stronger than him, Jinchuriki or not. But he had told us what we must do before his death." To this, the Hyuga turned to Sakura and said, "I just have one thing to ask, Sakura. Answer me before I choose to go." Sakura didn't respond, but Neji asked anyway, "Did Naruto fought to his dying breath? Did he continue to struggle even with those odds?" Sakura could only give him a wordless nod. "Then that's all the answers I'll need. I must go now. Training awaits, and I will improve to the point that no limits can ever restrain me. I will be a Hyuga that defies fate, much like how our comrade fought and decided his. This will be my way of honoring his sacrifice. I may not see this village the way that he does, but I will respect his wishes." With that, Neji decided to walk out of the restaurant, and soon enough, Lee spoke as well. "I am strong for I worked hard. I am a rock and I'll see to it that I remain strong. I must sustain my fortitude if only to not let a tragedy like this happen again. Naruto-kun has encouraged me to keep fighting, and if obtaining strength is the way to honor him, then I shall follow Neji's example." With that, Lee followed suit. Tenten bowed her head to her juniors as she said, "Sorry, I have to go. I have 2 boys that need to be watched over, and I can't do that if I couldn't keep up with them. Be strong, everyone. Especially now that this isn't all fun and games anymore." With that, Tenten followed suit, leaving behind 6 of the rookies at the restaurant. Ino could see Sakura still crying as she held her best friend as support. Shikamaru clicked his tongue as he looked outside. "Sakura, I want you to take me to Sasuke right now." "Why?" Sakura asked. Shikamaru answered promptly. "In order to stop both of your emotional train wrecks, I need to give both of you a way to snap out of this. Right now, both of you are in a bad shape. Your team will really do fall apart if this continues. Why be concerned about us?" Sakura asked. Shikamaru gave her answer that had convinced her. "Your team was the closest thing to a family that Naruto has ever had." The boy then looked outside as dark clouds littered the skies, and he closed his eyes in silent mourning. "If your team falls apart now, then Naruto's last refuge will be gone. Hyuga compound. The youngest of the main house siblings had never really understood the pain of loss. She had known of their mother's passing only by the stories shared to her by her nursemaid. She was far too young to even remember what happened back then, being just a newborn. Such a loss meant little to her, as she had not experienced fully her mother's love, much as she wished she could, just like her elder sister. But her elder sister was much as dear to her as would a child to a mother. Hinata was the closest thing to a mother that she could have, and for that, her elder sister was enough. She had seen her elder sister's motivation skyrocket these past few months and could see that underneath such a kind and loving exterior stood a fierce lioness. Just as she was admiring her beloved sister more and more, her fire was quickly snuffed out. She had returned 2 days ago, shocked, out of herself and generally unresponsive to the many people that was around her. Their father had told her to leave her sister for a while, as coping with loss is one of the things she must overcome on her own. She could not understand why Hinata looked so devastated at the death of her friend. A loved one is what her mind could only equate to, for she had never experienced such a deep and devastating loss on her own. Hanabi silently stood by the front door of her beloved elder sister. She had been waiting for several minutes, unsure of what to do that moment and hesitating if she should come in or not. Hinata had not eaten since the moment she arrived. She was getting worried. Her sister did not succumb so easily on the many hardships of what life threw at her. Does losing a loved one cause this much sadness to someone? Their father was silent on the whole matter, often secluding himself in his office but not being productive. The man was looking out of his window, as if he was very deep in thought. He would occasionally glance at the pictures that lay in his desk and would linger much longer on the image of his late wife. Their mother. She had asked Neji how difficult it was to losing someone that they loved, and Neji answered with something she could not immediately grasp yet. What you ask is difficult for me to answer, Hanabi-sama. Though I have experienced such a loss, no words can ever truly escape me as to how such a thing can be explained. It is unfathomable and at its very early ages, unbearable. But she wanted her beloved sister back. She wanted to see her sister again. So she resolved herself to come and see her beloved sister in her room. As she was about to reach at the door, Hiyashi had beat her to it and spoke outside. Hinata, I wish to speak with you. His eldest wordlessly opened the door and Hiyashi gave a silent nod. Hiyashi knew that his eldest only relented because of him. If it were anyone else, then Hinata wouldn't respond. He looked at his eldest, head cast down, hair messy and clothes wrinkled. He knew of this pain better than his own daughters. That is why he had to be the one to speak to her about it. It would not do well for Hinata to just give up and let go of the progress and life that she had been given. Clean yourself up, my daughter. We are going somewhere. Her eldest finally spoke. To where, father? He answered her truthfully. To visit your mother. Hinata gave a wordless nod and moved towards her washroom. Hiyashi went outside and closed the door behind him. He turned his attention to his youngest and said to her, Hanabi, it would be best for you to come as well. Hanabi gave a wordless nod and turned her back from her father and immediately scampered towards her room. There were times that strict discipline was merited for his children, and then there were times that now more than ever and that he would give his children the much needed report. It was a duty of a parent to keep pushing their children in different ways, as kind or as stern as possible, that Hiyashi would act as a parent. Uchiha compound. Wordlessly, the 6 former classmates entered the silent and hollow district of the Uchiha compound. This was the place where a heinous crime happened. Wherein in a span of just a single night, the Uchiha were almost wiped out save for Sasuke and Itachi. Thinking of the name of Sasuke's brother, Kiba couldn't help but growl and boil with rage. Pack instincts indicated that you should never betray your comrades for superfluous reasons. It didn't sit well with him, or with anyone for that matter, that Itachi killed his entire family save for Sasuke in cold blood and torture, the only exception that still lived to this day. It would be much more impactful now, seeing as his recent exploit struck closer to home. Needless to say, if he disliked Itachi then, he would most certainly and utterly hate the man now for his actions. Sasuke may have first dibs on the guy, but Kiba was amenable for having a share. When they made it to what they know as Sasuke's home, the first to knock was Shikamaru. There was no response. Annoyed that he would be snubbed, Shikamaru was about to knock again, when he heard the sound of 1,000 birds chirping from behind the last Uchiha's house. He's venting, Shikamaru commented. Sakura gave a nod and looked down. He's been doing it for the past 2 days ever since we got here. Why? Ino asked to Sakura as Choji interjected. Could it be that he's blaming himself for not having done a thing against his brother? Or he's getting antsy that he wants to train so hard so he could catch up sooner? Hiba gave a response as he clenched his left fist. If a friend dies at the hands of my sworn enemy that is difficult to beat, I know I would. He continued. They then heard the sound of granite exploding and the 6 of them began running to the back of Sasuke's house just to see what happened. Once they reached the place, they saw pieces of rubble scattered about, some trees were burned or toppled even bisected laterally while 2 rocks had holes the size of a person. In front of one the destroyed rocks stood Sasuke, his back turned against them, as if he wasn't even acknowledging their presence in his property. So this is what you've been doing for the past 2 days? Shikamaru commented. Sasuke never answered, instead he merely turned around. They could see the signs of dirt and grime spread over his clothes and face. He wasn't wearing his forehead protector as he frowned. What are you doing here at my house? He asked tersely. Nothing. I was just wondering why you've closed yourself off once again. Shikamaru commented. Sasuke merely scowled as he turned to the tall slab of stone that stood at his front and looked up. Whatever it is you think about me, I don't give a damn, and whatever it is that I feel is none of your goddamn business. Now, fuck off my property before I boot you all out. Hiba didn't like the tone of Sasuke's abrasive dismissal. What the fuck is your problem, Sasuke? We're all concerned for your team and you go acting like an asshat. Well then your concern is not needed. I'm fine on my own. Says the idiot whose idea is destroying his own backyard to vent. Shikamaru trailed off. Sasuke didn't seem to take it kindly. He growled when he turned to see Shikamaru. His eyes slowly turned red from his own anger at those words. Get out. Sasuke was gnashing his teeth in cold fury. He was ready to beat this team down to a pulp as he could feel drops of blood coming from his mouth and unnoticed by him, his eyes. I'm not budging an inch here, Sasuke, not until we talk about this. Preferably, now is the time. Shikamaru replied as he looked at Sasuke straight in the eye. I've lost my family, my clan and my friend to a monster who takes pleasure in my suffering. You don't know what it's like to have both the guilt and the fury of having to carry this for the rest of your life. You have no fucking idea. His Sharingan slowly began changing form and the boy grunted in pain as he held his right eye. Red and black swirled as it formed a 6-pointed star. Every single day is a painful reminder of the life that I once had and how it was taken away from me by a madman's quest for power. Do you think I would feel okay if I were in my own team after what happened? Are you fucking with me, Shikamaru? Shikamaru thought he was going to have to fight off this Sasuke, but he remained calm and not once did he remove his hands in his pocket. So you're okay to see the people that remain and who do care fall apart, too. That same amount of people who Naruto had genuine care for. Those same people that had watched him die. He asked, and to this end, Shikamaru pointed to Sakura who was looking at him with wide almost scared eyes. Sasuke calmed down and relented as he clicked his tongue and turned away. You're not the only one suffering. Choji interjected. We all are, Sasuke. It hit us hard too. So much that thinking about this organization that your brother joined in makes every drop of my blood boil in anger. After the treatment he got from this village, it makes it even more angering. I can't think straight, I want to tear something apart. But unlike you, I don't have your talent and I don't have your skill, so I have to remain calm and find a way around my weaknesses. But you're squandering yourself away, looking for power that can't be given to you immediately. So fuck you if you think Naruto's death hasn't affected us. You're not the only one who's hurt, Uchiha. Hiba said as he looked around. The arid heat from the embers of the smoldering trees mixed with the cold winds crept up to their skin. You've been given something better, Sasuke-kun. Naruto entrusted you with his request to give them hell. But your way is not and will not work. If you want to beat Akatsuki and avenge everyone, you have to work with us. Ino added as she held Sakura's shoulders, giving her a nod and gently pushed her forward, urging her to speak. Sakura looked at Sasuke in trepidation but nonetheless spoke to her remaining teammate. Sasuke-kun, about what happened to Naruto, I'm sorry. I wasn't good enough. Sakura said as tears began falling from her face once more. Sasuke's hazy vision of rage slowly decreased as he looked down. The grip of his anger slowly trickling down as he saw his only teammate left speaking to him. If only I had the skills of a good medic, he'd probably be still alive today, he'd probably be here, bothering you and throwing insults at you instead of you lashing out, instead of just waiting for Kakashi-sensei who was always late. I wish I could have saved him. She said between sobs. But I couldn't. I wasn't good enough. He was bleeding everywhere and all I could have done was prolong his suffering. But please stop pushing us away. Don't lash at everyone just because they care. It's not for you to carry on your own. Sasuke turned his head away and closed his eyes. I don't blame you because you couldn't save him. Sasuke then looked at the stone before him and punched it with all of his might. I blame myself for not having the strength enough to stop Itachi. Sasuke. Shikamaru then was about to step forward but stopped when Sasuke said to them. No, not another word, I just want all of you to go away, now. I want to be alone. Sasuke then turned back and went home, unmindful of the blood that was dripping in his hands. Listen here, I've just had about enough of your emo shit. As Kiba had said, he had enough of Sasuke's attitude. Everyone was grieving and none was hit more so than Team 7 and Hinata. He knew it was terrible, but Sasuke acting like a complete jerk was not something he would slide. He was about to approach Sasuke when Shino grabbed him. Everyone has different mechanisms of coping. Do not think for a second that Sasuke is pushing everyone away immediately, Kiba. We must give him time to arrange himself or else he will fall apart. Shino had warned him. Shino never did that. He never immediately asserted control over his teammates and merely gave small quips of advice. Kiba knew his teammates well enough. He knew that when Shino intervened, it was something much more serious. Choji then spoke to them looking crestfallen. Perhaps out of the entire rookie 9 excluding Hinata, Choji was much more empathic than the rest of them were. Let's go, this is all we're going to get through with Sasuke. We have our own lives to be worried about as well. With that, the 6 of them left the compound as Sasuke went inside his house and the blood that seeped from his eyes went unnoticed. This isn't about revenge anymore. This is about keeping the things of what's left with me going. One day, I'll stop Itachi and once I do, I'll be able to face my family and Naruto with a proud face. Konoha Cemetery. Hiashi had asked himself how long he had gone and visited his departed wife ever since her death. His guess was that not that many or even not at all. The pang of loss had hit him so hard back then that he had buried himself in work, retreated within himself to make him stop grieving. Hiashi may have known that they were married out of convenience, but he knew that when he had lost his wife, he felt a part of him died with her. Lady Hikaru Hyuga had touched his life as much as he had hers. As the 3 of them lay standing before the grave of his wife and Hinata and Hanabi's mother, Hiashi couldn't help but close his eyes in regret and thousands of apologies as he spoke. When Hikaru and I were wed, we were wed out of convenience. The clan had decided that we should carry out this marriage in order for the benefit of both of our clans. Hanabi and Hinata looked at their father before looking at their mother's grave once more. I had thought that the marriage would be loveless and just a way to secure the next heir to our family. Your mother and I weren't even given a choice at the matter, but we both knew that it would be for the best of both worlds, so we had agreed. Hiashi sighed as he spoke, but I was wrong. As time grew, so did our affections. Back then we would just meet each other out of duty, but we genuinely grew to care for each other. A casual dinner turned to something more meaningful and I grew to love your mother not just out of convenience. I can never speak for your mother, but she would return what little affections that I could give to her gladly with a smile. She was considerate of our situation and I have grown to love her for it. When she died, I could not face reality that she was gone. Her death had affected me more than my brothers. It is the kind of pain that will never heal, but one thing that I will carry for the rest of my life. Hiashi kneeled down and caressed the tombstone with his wife's name. Away from his children, he gave a soft smile as the deafening silence of the graveyard echoed throughout the place. When one perishes, they take along with them the hopes and dreams of other people. When your mother died, she took with her my love. It still rings true to this day, that her loss is a pain I have not recovered from. It will be hard, but we must remain strong. Your mother may have died, but I will carry this pain for as long as I live. That is why we are shinobi. For her sake, I will carry this pain and endure. Much like how you two must understand and much as how your cousin Neji has come to an understanding. Hinata had always known her father a distant figure in her life. He was stoic, stern and can be heartless. But she knew that stern parents sometimes meant well. For all her father's faults, she could not find any reason to hate him. He was her father after all, the one that brought her to this world, the one that gave her the chance to live and experience life even if it was harsh. He had taught her much as how Naruto did, and that she must endure. For Naruto's sake and for those still alive with her, but she could not hide the fact that she now had a growing resentment to those that denied Naruto of his future. If Sasuke could become an avenger meant to kill one person, then she would be the one to destroy every living trace of those that killed Naruto. This was her vow. Unknown location. A dreamless sleep. Darkness was all that plagued him. Everywhere he turned, every area he had walked, nothing but the pitch-black scenery was present. He saw nothing, could hear nothing, nor could he feel anything. He couldn't even feel himself, his perception of time was eschewed. He hadn't known how long he had been walking in this empty place. Nothing escaped here, not even his own visage was there. He walked in silence, his did not know where, but it was better than doing nothing, drifting off in nothing. Seconds turned to minutes, minutes to hours, and hours to days. At least from what he could gather. His mind was not working properly, as if stripped and left with nothing but the bare bones of his instincts. All his mind could tell him was walk and walk he did. As he traversed this nothingness into who knows where, into oblivion or into something, he cared not. As long as he saw something and felt something, he would be fine. Then, a glimmer of light, warm, bright red and orange flickered at his periphery. He turned around, and saw a torch upwards as a flight of stairs materialized beneath his feet and to his front, spiraling all the way to that simple light. He began scaling up the stairs, going up as he did so. His simple and calm walk became brisk, and his brisk walking turned to a jog then to a sprint. He could feel his mind beginning to hasten, he could see his arms, his legs, everything about him. He could see, he could hear, he could feel. That small glimmer of light soon began multiplying, lighting a hallway that was once pitch black. He continued to run until his legs give out, and run to something that could lead to anything. Anything but this empty, black and hollow place. A scream let go of a static connection until it stabilized and showed the face of a bandaged man on his forehead and encircling the right part of his said face. What is the current status of the Jinchuriki? He asked. The mask-wearing person sitting in front of him holding a chart replied in a monotonous tone. Brainwaves are starting to indicate movement, most likely he is in REM state as opposed to absolute nothing from a few days ago. He has absorbed the cells of Shodime-sama well throughout the procedure and there are very few traces of it in his body. The seals expert has also notified that the fourth Hokage's seal on the Jinchuriki's stomach is stable. We do not know the reason why it appears so but we are further looking into any possibility of Uchiha Itachi tampering with the seal. The man gave an amused smirk slightly as he turned his vision on the glass container holding the Jinchuriki. There, Uzumaki Naruto lay naked as the day he was born. The most surprising thing though, were the patches of ashen gray spots that littered his torso, a mark as the scar of brutality that Hoshigaki Kisame inflicted on him and suspended in liquid that he had otherwise learned the composition of from Hiruzen's former student, Orochimaru. It helped contain highly unstable test subjects that had been infused with gene-altering properties like his cursed seals or the cells of the Shodime Hokage. That boy has done well for the sake of Konoha. The spirit of a true shinobi truly does seep into his very veins like liquid fire. To this, the man chuckled. Danzo was pertaining to Itachi's unbreakable loyalty to Konoha's ideals. He is still useful to this very day. There was no denying that Uchiha Itachi truly would do everything in his power to protect Konoha, even if it meant sacrificing a Jinchuriki in order for the village to keep its Biju even though from the injuries that the Jinchuriki had sustained were most probably done by his partner. Itachi knew that should he forcefully try and stop Kisame, his cover would be blown and all information concerning Akatsuki would be held to a certain point. And that would simply not do. Danzo knew the origins of Akatsuki started within AIM, knew of its leader dying by the hands of his own comrade, that they were picked off one by Hanzo's loyalists. This fringe group that now worked internationally and composed of the most dangerous of criminals in the known world was something he would not pass up if it meant they were a threat to his village. To Itachi, a loss of someone like Uzumaki Naruto would simply be incomparable to the loss of an entire village. Itachi did not want to place the cart before the horse, so to speak. Danzo had the same mindset. he would not hesitate to kill one in order to save the rest. Naruto may be an important piece, but he was only a minuscule part of the Kyuubi. Sad as it was that the line of the fearsome Namikaze Minato and equally dangerous Uzumaki Kushina would be abruptly halted, he knew for a fact that Naruto was simply nothing more than a shinobi with very little to offer in the grand scheme of things. The boy did not have Minato's intuitive mind or Kushina's special chakra. He only had large reserves of chakra and a mind that was only just flourishing. And nothing could be grander than the prosperity and safety of his village. But it was strange when they discovered that the seal was still strong enough to hold the beast back. Danzo knew that seals, such as the one on the boy, were implied to be tied to their life forces. To see it never wavering was a testament to how powerful the boy's life force was or how much of a genius both Minato and Kushina were in the field of the sealing arts. Either way, he would see to it that he take advantage of every opportunity that presents to him, including this one, if he could do anything about it. He is close to waking up, sir. His subordinate had interrupted him of his thoughts as Danzo gave a wordless nod before he gave another order. Remove him from that stasis chamber and prepare a bed for him. See to it that his ability to mold chakra is restrained. I want Uzumaki to wake up, as normal as he could possibly fathom. I do not want an unstable Jinchuriki waking up and cause any stress levels that could possibly mean a compromise to this base. His subordinate replied with a nod. As you wish, Danzo-sama. With that, the screen with Danzo's face fizzled out of existence and shut down. Within the mind of a comatose shinobi, Naruto continued running as the higher functioning processes of his mind slowly began returning to him. The solid stone and brick ground he was walking on soon turned wet. Water was now flooding the area that reached just above his ankle. He didn't give any heed to it as he continued to run with the torches lighting up before him as he made his way towards something. This place wasn't a hallway now, it was a tortuous labyrinth, and every time he had passed an intersection, a part of his memory was slowly going back to him. Every twist and turn through this maze made him recall his past, like how he grew up, his mistreatment, his loss of hope. All emotions of despair, anger, hatred and seclusion hit him like an enormous tidal wave of strong utter resentment and malcontent coming from a sea of pure bleak darkness. He stumbled, slowly lost his footing for a moment, but he continued to run. The weight of his feet splashing on the water was slowly weighing him down. But he continued, persevered throughout his struggle as the light of the torches guided him to where they were leading him, anywhere but the nothingness that had embraced him earlier. His desires to see through this trial made him push himself farther, ignoring the weight of the water bearing down on his legs. It was difficult but not tiresome, his body never tired. He didn't know how long he had run, the concept of time still was not present to him. All he knew was that he had to continue, he didn't want to look back. Nothing was there, and the only feeling he could have there was the feeling of emptiness. He didn't want that, so he ran. He ran as far as his legs could take him, and he simply would not care. He did not want to be in such a dark and lifeless place any longer. He would grab this chance, a chance to be free from such a place. A chance to be alive. Soon enough, his patience, however thin as it might be, was rewarded. The hallways were getting larger and larger as he continued his pace, and right then and there, he ended up to the very edge of this road. He had stood in an area on what he would call a hub, or at least at the very center of it. In front of him stood a gigantic gate, made of ivory and gold, with a thin piece of paper plastered in the middle and the word, seal, written on it. Blue energy began to coalesce at his front, forming there, a visage of a full-grown adult. He was tall with messy, pointy hair swinging about every which way, held up by a headband, with his side bangs being held with small pieces of cloth as well, and pointy sharp eyes that were filled with much wisdom of the world. The man wore a simple long overcoat with the collar propped up to his cheeks, 6 symbols of the Magatama surrounding his chest in a semicircular pattern, and a sash that covered him. His long sleeves have covered his right hand as his left held a shaku staff. The man looked down on Naruto and he smiled. Your persistence bears merit, child. Naruto could only give out the best response a bewildered child could ever have, and asked in confusion, what? Soon, the boy added, you were the person from my dreams, why are you here? Who are you? The man gave a reply as he held the shaku staff just above the boy's forehead. I am your distant past. The man gave a reply as he grinned. I am one who is bound to the cycle of transmigration, the second son of the Rakuto Sennin who once was heir to the teachings of Ninshu. You were me hundreds if not thousands of years ago. You were but one of the many lives I chose to live in the past. But one that is most undeniably, the one I share the strongest connection yet. He said as his shaku staff lightly tapped Naruto on the forehead. A ripple of chakra resonated from his forehead and Naruto looked at the man with wide eyes. And all at once, Naruto saw the multiple people that this person's soul had lived on to. Otsutsuki Ashura, why are you here? How is it that you are able to talk to me? Naruto asked. The chakra construct looked behind him and beyond the ivory and gold gate of that lay behind him. It is because you have a fragment of the past that shares the same essence as Ashura. Naruto turned his attention to the creature inside the cage and couldn't help but ask, Kurama. Death has surprisingly dulled your mind, brat. But unsurprisingly your bravado lay strong still. The fox commented and he looked at the boy with a smirk, baring his sharp and large set of teeth at the boy. What exactly do you mean? Naruto asked. The fox gave a huff as it looked at the construct that was Ashura and then looked at the boy. During your stasis, you were never retrieved back to Konoha. You were taken by someone I know not. But what he did have and what was familiar to me, were the cells of the first Hokage, Hashirama Senju, the last person to be transmigrated by Ashura before you. It is why you have a stronger connection to this man than any other soul who has housed the spirit of the second son. The cells of the Shodaime, just what happened? How long was I unconscious? Do you know where we are now? Brat, you were very close to death. The only thing that kept you alive was Ashura's chakra that is bursting with yang chakra, but be that as it may, it was not enough to keep you alive. When you were carried into a bag, it was all I could sense before you were placed in a stasis blocking of any semblance of time as I detected a seal. You were carried to this place that I know nothing about. But by then, the cells of the first Hokage had already fused into you, accelerating your healing factor by several times. When Ashura's chakra came in contact with the cells of the Shodaime, the cells reacted and recognized immediately that Ashura's chakra was alive and well and doubled its efforts to keep you alive. That's it. The fox grew irate for a moment but replied with a huff, that's all there is to it. So now that you're active here, what's going to happen now? Naruto turned to Ashura who looked up and began thinking. Honestly, I do not know. This is the first time I am having this kind of conversation with any of my reincarnations. What is it that you want to do? Naruto merely gave the best answer that he could think of at the moment, go back to Konoha, of course. The giant fox snorted, good luck with that brat. I feel your chakra right now is being restrained. Both Ashura and Naruto looked at the giant fox and asked in confusion, what? For a moment there, Kurama thought that the two idiots in front of him were turning out to be complete carbon copies. The fox merely gave a grin when he felt Naruto's body was slowly recovering at a fast rate. You're about to find out. Naruto was about to ask a question when he was met with a blue ceiling and a single rotating fan attached to it. He got up as he could feel his body sore from not being able to move very much. He looked forward to see a hooded man wearing a long coat standing at his front before he went out of the room quietly. He looked to his right and saw green drapes overwhelming his vision as it did to the left. Naruto knew he was in a ward of some sort. He looked down to his hands and surprisingly found them bandaged and now restrained with big heavy metal cuffs with hundreds of seal inscriptions laced onto them. Naruto had to ask himself once more to where he was as he looked around, but his thoughts on his current surroundings were cut off when he heard a voiceover to a small speaker that was conveniently placed on his side. Good evening, Uzumaki-san. Before you ask, you are currently in a classified stronghold meant for highly trained assassins. I trust that your near encounter with death has been harrowing. Sawed off with those pleasantries. Where the hell am I? Naruto insisted as he scowled at the voice. It sounded so forceful and authoritarian, a stark contrast to the old man Hokage used to have. I will not dignify that response and give away this location. The fact of the matter is, you are alive because of me and I have made sure to cover everything in the event that you try to escape. Consider me your benefactor and your leader from now on. Naruto growled, what the hell do you want from me? The voice in the small speaker spoke quickly as if he already knew Naruto would be asking that. You are a shinobi that carries within you the most destructive biju in existence. For that, you are a liability as much as you are a powerful deterrent, a wild card if the current moniker is to be applied. I only wish to harness that power to myself and use it to serve for my purpose. However, the way it is now, you are inefficient. So I wish to refine such things and drill into you the aspects of power. Why? Naruto asked. The voice replied once more quickly. For the sake of everything, Uzumaki-san, for everything. The Sandaime Hokage was a fool to treat you so benignly. He was a sentimental old codger who had given more to his emotions rather than through logic. Naruto gritted his teeth as the person behind the small speaker let it made known to the blonde that he was chuckling. Don't you dare speak about the old man as if you know him. You are angry. Why do you look up to that man? He has done nothing more than to obscure you from the truth. He lied to you, manipulated you, and made you close to him so that you could only be loyal to him. Naruto was now furious and let made known to the bastard behind the sound system know just what he thought. Whatever it is you're trying to tell me, fuck off. The old man may have been stern and a pervert, but he at least treated me like someone. Ah, show them kindness and kindness will be rewarded in return. The Sandaime Hokage indeed is a great diplomat in all aspects of life. You are deluding yourself if you think the Sandaime showed you genuine kindness without any ulterior motives. That man isn't above using such tactics. Memories of the old man teaching him how to read and write surfaced within him, and Naruto felt like punching the damn speaker and rid of himself with this nuisance. All human actions contain motives beneath them. It is by nature that humans act in their own self-interests, selfish by all accounts and therefore justifiable since humans have been self-preserving since the dawn of time. Your precious Sandaime only became kind to you in return that your loyalty would be tied to him and only to him. Giving spiels of his actions meant for his village is nothing more than you adhering to him and his ideals, not for the village itself. Can we figure out how to get rid of this seal? Naruto asked to the entities that were inside him. Inside, Ashura and Kurama looked at the blonde before answering him truthfully. I can decipher the seal for you, but it would take us weeks or even months to figure this seal out without having prior knowledge of the seal's principal structure. Ashura answered him. The man seemed to recall his daughter who had taught him all about sealing. Getting impatient of that man, are you? For now, I suggest to bear with it while Ashura and I configure the seal and you can come back to your precious village. Kurama gave a low laugh as Naruto went outside, his eyes narrowing on the small speaker just beside his bed. A statement from the man behind the speakers seemed to make a resonating impression towards him. What do you mean by lied to? He finally asked after a few seconds of silence. The man gave a chuckle that Naruto wanted to punch the damn speakers so hard that not a trace of it would be left. He was keeping his very short temper in check or else he might do something he'd regret later. Uzumaki Naruto. An orphan during the siege of the Kyuubi no Yoko 13 years ago, you were chosen as the vessel of the said beast at the cost of the life of the Yondaime Hokage, his wife and a multitude of shinobi. What many did not know, is the fact that the Yondaime Hokage used his own son as the sacrifice to seal away the great beast. The Yondaime's wife turned out to be one of the very last members of the Uzumaki household who had the ability to suppress the powers of tailed beasts with her chakra alone. There are no records being kept in your village. Your birth was done by secrecy. The only document that proves that you are indeed the vessel of the Kyuubi is your birth certificate. That was something the Sandaime had erroneously overlooked. But even then, the names of your parents were removed and blacked out. Naruto's mind went blank all of a sudden as he held his breath from the shock of finding out of his parentage. He could not believe that his own hero, his idol, the Yondaime Hokage, turned out to be his father. He did not know if he should be angry or glad. The person who he had idolized and deemed as the fastest shinobi alive was also the person who had condemned him to a life of misery and continuous struggle. The person who had given him the chance to live was also the one who made him realize the harshness of life itself. Do you hate your father now? Do you hate the way your life has turned for the worse since being told nothing about the absolute truth? Naruto, his voice shaking in the aftermath of his realization, asked the man behind the speakers all the while gripping tightly on the covers of his bed. How do you know this? Why would you say something this? I know many things because I will do anything in my power to obtain my objectives. I will resort to every possible tactic that I can think of, for the sake of my ideals. In order to do that, I must set one of my biggest pieces free with the truth as my key. The truth is that, indeed, the Sandaime is not the man that you know, at least from where I can look. He is a liar. He will manipulate you to do his bidding and he will not hesitate to do so in order to wipe his hands clean off of any particular incident should it occur. He may have intended you to become that disposable pawn when the time came. To this, Naruto had gritted his teeth and smashed the small speaker with his metallic cuffs. The boy was breathing heavy out of the anger that seemed to escape him. Naruto held his head of messy blonde hair as he sat on the edge of his hospital bed and bent down in confusion. Has that opened your eyes to the truth, Uzumaki-san? Have my words finally reached you? Or do you wish to wallow in denial once more? Whatever seems to be the case, I care not. My only concern is to train you up to snuff, since I have wasted precious resources in restoring you back to full health and then some just so that I could just make things easier for me in tutoring a soldier like yourself. If you do not wish to comply, then feel free to be trapped here for the rest of your life or until such a time that I take away the Kyuubi within you. It is your choice. The boy was surprised as he stood from his bed and pushed the drapes back only to see one side of the room having another set of speakers placed conveniently at the top this time. But nevertheless, the boy, instead of breaking more things, decided to keep his already burning temper down to a boil. He had thought what the person was talking about when the man said he had used the man's precious resources on him. Naruto thought that the man was talking about the first Hokage's cells being implanted to him. What this man didn't know, however, was that because of these same very cells, he was already figuring out how to get out of this place via the help of the apparition of Otsuki Ashura. Naruto, instead, clicked his tongue and looked down. His upper body was surrounded by bandages, not a trace of flesh was present until his shoulders. He had remembered that his right arm was dislocated at the shoulder. Someone must have realigned it and let the Kyuubi's healing factor to do the work for him. He had no choice whatsoever in the matter. If his ability to mold chakra was restricted, Kurama would be taken from him and he didn't know what kind of consequences that would entail. Fine then, training it is. I don't see why I should escape anyway. I don't have the ability to mold chakra and I can't exactly fight with my hands cuffed like this. You are not as dumb as people say you are, Uzumaki-san. I would have thought by now that escape would be your first priority, seeing as you hate it when things do not go your way. Naruto dismissed the thought of it even though he felt like punching something again. Whatever, I don't want to talk about shit everybody already knows. Let's just get this over with. He had already enough remarks about his intelligence and he didn't need it from someone who he doesn't even know. Well then, I suppose we can start tomorrow. Even with the Kyuubi's regeneration and innate healing jutsu that we have planted in you, you are still far too injured to do anything. The voice then added as it chuckled, let me give you a word of advice concerning tomorrow's training method. Survive. Survive. The order of business for your training, to become my trump card, requires that you must have a merciless understanding of battle. The only thing that is holding you back from your potential is not simulation, jutsu and the like, but experience. You are still green even though you were officially promoted. With experience comes battlefield knowledge, the idea of how your opponents will move, how they will strike and to exploit openings and weaknesses with only taijutsu. Your training commences in 12 hours. You will be pitted against assassins who are debriefed that they are to approach you with the intent to kill. I do not need soldiers who are useless. So is your first lesson. Kill or be killed. Naruto growled at the man before he replied, some leader you are, choosing to sacrifice your men like that. With the work I do comes sacrifice, something that you hopefully do understand as the days continue. Konoha. Nightfall. It was raining. Dark clouds covered the blue sky as it happened. Thunder and lightning crackled above as water poured down on the village of Konoha. Hatake Kakashi stared at the memorial stone with nothing but regrets in mind for tonight. He wasn't surprised when he called for a meeting earlier with his team that only a downtrodden Sakura who looked like she was carrying the guilt of her teammate's death with her appeared while Sasuke chose to skip that day. The boy hadn't appeared in training with his Anbu instructor as well. The Anbu instructor daftly noted that he was excusing Sasuke from his duties. The man wasn't a complete asshole enough to rub salt on fresh wounds. He found it highly ineffective and usually played with much stronger and unstable emotions. The horrible job of being the messenger as well as team leader fell on his shoulders a few days ago when Tsunade had told him to tell those that were very close to Naruto, particularly Iruka. It was horrible enough that the man chose to weep inside the faculty room. It was more cringe-inducing when Anko was there, who tried her best to calm Iruka down. Perhaps the most saddening thing to ever come out of Iruka's mouth was that he considered Naruto his own son and that a death of the child was more heartbreaking when they die before the parent. Kakashi looked at the name of his departed sensei and thought about it for very long. You would have been grateful of the man, yet utterly disappointed in me, sensei, and maybe even angry at me for letting this happen. Kakashi muttered and then knelt down before sliding his hand at the name engraved on the stone that stated, Uchiha Obito. He was so like you that he even died before his teammates. Your history were so much alike that it was painful in seeing it in him, and it repeated once more when I tried to actively push those thoughts away. It seems failure actively courses through my veins. The man closed his eyes, in silent prayer as he offered them to his fallen comrades. Kakashi had never felt so utterly disgraced today as he was when Obito was killed. He was about to stand when he felt a familiar presence walk towards him. You're late, the man stated and turned towards Sasuke, who was walking aimlessly with his hands in his pockets. You look like a stray animal, Sasuke. Do you want to talk about it? Sasuke merely gritted his teeth and replied to his sensei, there's nothing to talk about. Then have you at least come here to honor the dead? Sasuke replied, eyes burning in hatred as he remembered the words of his fallen teammate and the mistreatment he had suffered at their hands. There was no honor with Naruto's death. He died knowing he had very few people who had genuine care for him. I would sooner rather see this village burned than let them pay their respects. Kakashi shook his head as he instructed Sasuke, follow me, Sasuke. The last and hopefully loyal Uchiha looked at the man in wonder as he asked, why and where are we going? To realize that your statement is incredibly too broad and too generalizing. Naruto doesn't want you to stereotype anyone any more than they do him. You should at least have an understanding of that. To that, Sasuke followed his sensei and wondered what he had meant. They arrived at Naruto's favorite restaurant, Ichiraku Ramen. Inside, there sat a man at the table who was looking down at his ramen. It was Iruka, and beside him sat Anko. Kakashi had given the boy a gesture that told him to sit on top of the roof of the small restaurant. When he was within earshot, Sasuke silently listened to the people below him. Has Tsunade-sama confirmed the boy's death, Iruka? An elderly male asked. To this, the familiar voice of their former academy instructor replied, no, she has not. Tsunade-sama said that she would tonight after seeing the body. It's unbelievable that Naruto-kun would be taken away from us so abruptly. One of the females spoke in a rather low voice, almost as if she was saddened by the fact that reality had suddenly pulled them down. Unfortunate as it is, I grew a liking to that brat, too. For one, he has enough balls to not even get a lick of fear from me. I know it's hard for Iruka and the rest of you, but at least Naruto fought it out until the end. A true shinobi, that boy, the other female commented. Iruka then spoke out to his current seatmate. Even so, Naruto was like my son. To see a child go before a parent, I realize now how much something like that hurts. I now understand why my father and mother were fierce with their protection. A parent dying for their child is tragic, but a child dying before their parent is something else. It's much more painful and much more excruciating. To Sasuke, it felt like a knife was wedged within his chest. We say the damnedest of things most of the time. We put our pain above others, and in turn, we cause the same pain to them because of our selfishness. Kakashi mentioned as Sasuke looked away, eyes closed and teeth clenched. Try to understand, Sasuke. Pain is inevitable, we will have it one way or another, and some more than others too. But Naruto, unlike many of us, rose above his pain. Do you know what's worse than losing someone? Sasuke looked at Kakashi and then looked out onto the rooftops of Konoha's buildings. The clouds were dispersing and the rain was stopping. He answered the man in a manner of calmness that was much different from what many were used to him, having no one at all. Loneliness that no one can bear, nothing to hold on to and nothing to have, it is a kind of pain that gnaws at your mind, it is insidious and inconceivable. I've seen what that kind of pain can do to someone, how much it drives anyone insane. To this Sasuke turned to Kakashi and continued, now that I think about it, I've seen something like that before. Without having anyone in their lives, they have gained no value within themselves and seek things to validate their existence. Kakashi had quipped, and Sasuke had a chill running from his spine as he looked towards the faces of the Hokage. It was spine-chilling how such a thought could create monsters like Gaara, and how close Naruto was to have that same kind of attitude. It was as if he looking at two sides of the same coin. Monsters are born for every selfish deed we do, and they are killed mercilessly without as much as a reason. But along with that comes people who are willing to be much more than what we designate as human nature. Kakashi replied as he looked up. The full gaze of a half moon had already appeared. They do exist within the confines of our own nature. It's just that it is much easier to live by the way we were intended to be, beasts with very little compassion. Iruka was the first person in Naruto's life to have risen above that. Kakashi then held the boy's head and ruffled it gently. Did you know that Iruka's parents died by the hands of the Kyuubi when it rampaged in Konoha? Sasuke looked at Kakashi in shock and then looked down at Iruka. Seeing Naruto every day during class must have been painful for him. To think that the living memory of his dead parents was sitting in front of him, being carefree or acting like a fool. But Iruka looked past his prejudices and soon realized that the boy who acted out was merely craving for attention just like him after the Kyuubi incident. Kakashi then stood up from the roof as he noticed an eagle circling above him. He was being summoned to the Hokage's office. That is the lesson here, Sasuke. We must look beyond our preconceived notions. In order for us to become truly strong, we must learn to take a great leap forward. But what about revenge? For what my brother did to my clan, my family and to my teammate? Sasuke said as his fists were shaking in anger. Remember our little talk back then. I'm not stopping you for your quest for vengeance. Many of us look for retribution. But to be obsessed by it that you lose yourself in your hatred, it is something that I cannot agree with. Because once the deed is done, what do you think you will do after your revenge? Reviving your clan has become an afterthought, right? That's what all Avengers understand. Obtain revenge, and everything will be back to normal. Kakashi then held up a single sign as he said to Sasuke before vanishing in a cloud of smoke. Except that it doesn't. Sasuke, it never does. Sasuke decided it was time to go away from the top of the ramen shop as he began to think. Vengeance, what lies beyond it? A question he had to ask himself was all he could think about that night and completely lay in the back of his mind for the next day. He was going back to the ANBU's training program. Hokage Tower. Kakashi, whenever he was called alone in the office, usually meant that he would be tasked to do something difficult. A shinobi of his caliber could only be trusted to do things that his leaders would trust him with. Whether it was something big or subtle, they would give him a mission that would truly test his very limits as the one deemed as the copy ninja. Their unparalleled trust in him is the same as how the Hokage and her counselors would trust Jiraiya in obtaining information in regards to his network of highly important espionage teams and contacts. To see both of them together in the same room with the Hokage looking dreadfully serious was not something he would take in passing. I have a secret mission for you too. Kakashi raised an eyebrow at this as Tsunade gave the both of them folders of the exact same files. When Kakashi had opened the envelope, his eyes grew even more curious at the content of the mission profile. Jiraiya had beaten him as he asked Tsunade, "This is an autopsy report." "An autopsy report of my godson, no less. What are you implying, Tsunade?" Kakashi could feel Jiraiya's anger seething from him. He could feel Jiraiya letting loose a sliver of killing intent as Tsunade explained. It isn't the boy's true body. It was made to look like one, down to the last detail on his face and body build. I've ran some DNA tests and all of my results didn't match Naruto's records. There may be a chance that the boy is alive still. Tsunade commented, earning an incredulous look from Jiraiya. By the sage, Tsunade, who would do such a thing to Minato's kid? You aren't exactly thinking of what I'm thinking about this, are you? Tsunade gave a deep breath and closed her eyes before she leaned back on her chair and turned around to face the window of her office. I've had my suspicions, but we could be looking at this into another angle. He's the obvious choice from the list of suspects I've been examining for the past few hours. The problem is it's all assumptions unless we have enough proof. Danzo and his lackeys are far too slippery for their own good. We won't have anything against him if he does manage to obtain Naruto. He's likely to remove his trail back then. He's that paranoid and that meticulous. Kakashi then asked a question. Then what do you propose, Hokage-sama? Tsunade stood up and scowled as she looked out the window. Find him. Right now, our priority is to locate the real Uzumaki Naruto, whether he's alive or dead. Danzo's goons are situated all around the country. Infiltrate every nook and cranny of Danzo's bases. Even Danzo's drawer shouldn't be left unchecked. This is off the books because of its secrecy. I want every piece of damning evidence there is that I can get my hands on. If that doesn't work, then getting Naruto home would be all that I need. Kakashi and Jiraiya nodded. What Tsunade wanted wasn't Danzo's head, she wanted closure. And if Danzo's head were to be a consolation, she would not be complaining. Chapter 14. Reasoning. He had been here for more than 2 months already. And during the hellish 2 months of what he would call more as a cruel no-holds-barred beat-down rather than training, Naruto's mind developed a thinking process that was much faster than what he was during his earlier days. It was true that in his earlier days, the power of observation went past his head. He would often neglect the many aspects of simple posturing and how much they telegraph moves. By no means was he a taijutsu expert like Lee, Guy, Neji or even Hinata and Sasuke. But he could tell now how one's simple and subtle moves could mean a lot of things, especially when concerning knife and sword users. He had learned the hard way to always look out on the elbows, shoulders and even feet. He was glad that he could still even walk away from a fight, though there were situations that were cutting it absolutely close. Naruto now had a certain respect for sword wielders and he would do well to be careful of them from now on. But if there was one thing he could take away more in this training is the satisfaction that he had not once killed someone senselessly just because a creepy and unassuming man told him so. Naruto would not give him the satisfaction of having to prove his views right. Time and time again, he would once more face the same opponent every day for 2 months, with the fight lasting for several hours and Naruto coming out injured but alive, with his opponent either unconscious or fatigued to the point of losing consciousness. He would leave the stands since it wasn't closed off. There was no point in creating a sealed room in a den of assassins. His opponent would always come back with the same haunting porcelain white mask with no face and only eye holes for the user to see. And many times, Naruto would be injured, sometimes almost gravely, that he became dizzy from the blood loss. But he would always come out on top. The person in front of him couldn't possibly even be older than him. His height was showing he was close to Naruto's age. When Naruto saw that he was about to face or possibly kill this boy for the first time, his blood boiled and grew to hate the old man who spoke to him on the speakers. He was literally just offering him a chance to kill the man's many subordinates if it felt like it would be good for their ideals. A method Naruto had an utter dislike of. If he were to meet this man in person someday, he was going to be the one who puts an end to this man and his horrible tendencies. Naruto swore this on his code of honor. The man obviously had either the charisma or the machinery to have many followers and to have established something as large as this base underground, to say the least. He was thinking that the man was probably influential enough to some part of the world to be this big. He was a manipulative and a lying bastard to boot. The man had coerced him into training or he dies. The moment of conversations with the man was extremely unpleasant for him. The man would speak about his shortcomings, of how ineffective the Sandame's rule was, how gullible were the citizens of Konoha to believe in the Sandame's kind words, how they were deceiving. The man wouldn't simply shut up and dropped bombshell after bombshell to him within earshot, and it really managed to rile Naruto up. He had learned that the Yondaime Hokage was his father, and his father was the one who sealed away Kurama within him in order to protect the village. The man had told him that he knew about his relationship with the Yondaime Hokage, and just the same, he would lambaste the fourth Hokage as much as he did with the Sandame for reasons of Minato adhering to the Sandame's ideals. But at least he was the leader that many of his opponents feared. The fourth Hokage was known as the moniker of Konoha no Kuroi Senko, the yellow flash of the leaf. His speed was unparalleled in the battlefield and he could turn the tide of entire wars with just a single jutsu. Make no mistake, many of the legends and myths surrounding the Yondaime Hokage were no mere exaggerations. As Iwa can attest to the power of the Yondaime, they were decimated and it ultimately decided the outcome of the war itself. It was probably why the man respected the fourth Hokage even by a little, even though the man had a completely different set of moral codes and ideas concerning the village. 2 months ago, Naruto would have probably hit someone out of anger for someone so incredibly callous and unforgiving. But Naruto had to bide his time. He needed to figure out a way to get out of this hellhole before the man became fed up with his antics and decides to get rid of him and extract Kurama. As it is, the said beast and his new freeloader were too busy reading on to the seal that was placed on his arm shackles that restrains him from using chakra. But not only was it consuming time, Naruto was running out of patience from this whole ordeal. Any more and he would probably go berserk when it happens. It did not help the fact that Kurama kept taunting him about his whole situation. If he weren't such a massive asshole, Naruto could get along with Kurama. Thank the sage that Ashura was the voice of reason during the whole time. You are to begin your handicapped match. As always, I expect you to kill your opponent or you will be killed. But I suppose beggars can't be choosers, can they? You always win your fights and you manage to beat your opponent time and time again with nothing but your incredible physique and reflexes. Well, I assure you that we won't be having any of that now. His opponent faced him once again. This time, the boy was holding a brush and scroll in his hands. Naruto scowled. His gut instinct was telling him that today was going to be much more arduous than the last times he had been doing these death matches. The man was getting fed up with his antics and a part within Naruto relished the fact that he enjoyed pissing him off. Kill or be killed, Uzumaki Naruto, this is my law. If you do not wish to be dead in the next few minutes, then face the boy with all you have. He will use every branch of the shinobi arts against you and all the advanced training he has ever attained to cut you down. I care not what happens in the end, you are proving to be more of a liability than an asset. Naruto smirked wickedly at the man. Randomly throwing away your pieces just for training seems like a waste, bastard. If you want me to be strong, then I've done plenty of that for the last 2 months of the hell you've put me through. But make no mistake, I'll still win your stupid match and not a damn mouse is getting killed today. The man gave a pompous humph over the speakers and said to the boy, very well, you've made your decision. Agent, kill this boy. The Kyuubi is indispensable but you however, are not, Uzumaki Naruto. Mission accepted. The masked child replied in monotone as Naruto gritted his teeth. The boy unfurled the scroll in his hands as his right hand began drawing multiple animals with black ink in rapid and fluid strokes. How long is that seal going to be studied? I'm getting tired of the shit these bunch of ass wipes are pulling. Hearing his question inside of himself, Ashura had answered him with a calm voice, just a little more, Kurama and I are already figuring out a way to destroy the seal. We'll get to you shortly. Make sure that you do not lose this fight. Ashura, during his conscious stay within the mind of this boy, soon began growing more and more respect to the boy because of his tenacious attitude and unbending determination. There were multiple times that he could see the boy faltering but he never sank low. The boy kept strong mentally even though the mental abuse had been almost too unbearable then. The boy kept fighting for his beliefs and would rather go down with dignity if it meant he could hold on to them until the very end. Even though the boy felt betrayed or even lied to by many of his superiors and the village in general, Naruto decided to understand the motives behind the actions rather than the act itself. If he were to falter now, then he would be no better than the people that had done him wrong in the past and his own pride would be his undoing. So he remained steadfast. If he gets out of here, then he will decide what to think about everything that has happened to him. There was no reason to cling thoughts to past transgressions, they were done and nothing would happen if he would lash out at them. He would know just what awaited him if he did so. After all, in order to understand someone, you had to walk a mile in that person's shoes. And Gaara had given him plenty of reason not to falter again. And he swore an oath once more as the boy's ink drawings began to grow past his scroll and coming to life as the lion-like beings touched their pale-colored paws on the floor. No matter how dark the road gets, I won't have any regrets, I'll keep fighting. Konoha. A full moon had escaped tonight as Sasuke stared up at it in a stoic gaze. He had not seen Kakashi very much as did Sakura who, last that he had heard, asked for an apprenticeship under Tsunade's care as did Ino, who took an extra mile by further studying her family jutsu. To say that the Hokage was surprised would be an understatement but nonetheless it began placing her under a rigorous training program much like he was in. Sasuke then looked at the medical patches placed on his arms and on his left cheek. Falcon had been lenient on him on his return but Sasuke flat out refused to let that leniency come to him in exchange for harsher training. He had sworn on his pride that he would prevent any more deaths at the hands of his brother and coddling him at his most vulnerable was not what he wanted if he were to give divine retribution against the people his brother had killed and the weakness Sasuke carried within him. Falcon saw the self-loathing and anger radiating from the boy and advised him to channel that hatred into something more productive as the harsh training began. Falcon did not belittle him then, no. He forced Sasuke's anger to come out in full force and use it as drive for his training. For the first time in years, Sasuke felt emancipated from the weight of his emotions then. He had undergone a sense of clarity that he had never had before. Though he would never show it, Sasuke was so happy then that he indulged himself to have a chat with Sakura, who he had come across in the village after his training, and assured her that whatever happened was none of her fault and that he was going to correct the mistakes his brother had made. He had asked Sakura the status of their peers out of curiosity to see if they could aid him in his self-appointed mission. Imagine his surprise that Hyuga Neji was now training with elemental manipulation and that he once more went against his earth nature and decided to use lightning as one of his tools to supplement his already superior taijutsu ability. Shikamaru had also begun looking more and more into the intelligence division to gather information about Itachi's highly dangerous rogue organization and began cooking up stratagems and formations to look over. Shikamaru was obsessed with his task now that he made blueprints of his multiple diagrams that his room slowly began to fill with a lot of notes, research materials and plotting diagrams. Sasuke would definitely consult him once he was ready to hunt down Itachi. Hinata, once she removed the weakness of her doubt within herself, was soon catching up to her cousin and closing the gap fast when it came to taijutsu alone. Sakura commented that out of all their peers, Hinata was more committed to her goals now than ever before. Sasuke wasn't surprised by it, not one bit. He understood her desire for blood, but he was not going to let her take Itachi's head. That was his job. To Sasuke, Shikamaru and Neji were already beginning their steps of preparation against Akatsuki, as did Sakura. Kiba and Choji were also coming along well, and Sasuke was hoping to ask for their help in the foreseeable future if he needed to. But right now, next to Shikamaru was Shino. The fact that he had never heard of the boy for over several weeks was a feat in itself. His thoughts were cut off when he was suddenly in front of a giant tree with 4 ninjas standing on its branches. In a village like Konoha, scenes of these were familiar when the patrolling police night watch officers make their rounds to look out during the wee hours of the evening. People in ninja villages were no stranger to sights such as these, but Sasuke had scowled when he saw the symbols etched on their forehead protectors. Oto Shinobi, what the hell are they doing here? They even had the audacity to appear in such a place. It was either they were confident enough of their skills or they were too stupid to come out in the open in the middle of the village that they labeled as their sworn enemy. Sasuke was betting on the latter. One of them stood on the top right branch, long blue straight hair covered at left cheek with what seemed to be another head sticking out behind him, looked down at Sasuke and sneered. This is the new vessel that Orochimaru-sama was talking about. That snake user's followers are here. What are they doing in Konoha? Just with the name Orochimaru, Sasuke was already on guard, and on instinct, his right hand quickly made a grab for the sword that was strapped on his back. Sasuke cursed inwardly when he found out that the sword he was in possession with was not a real one but instead a Bakken. The one with the 6 arms and the ponytail, sitting on the lower left branch, gave a condescending sneer at Sasuke. He doesn't look like much. What the hell was Orochimaru-sama thinking? The only girl in the group who was standing on the upper left branch scoffed at it and turned her head away. No shit, detective. He looks pathetic. The fat one that sat just on the lower right branch then chastised his teammate, Tayuya, a girl like you shouldn't swear so much. Fuck you, Jirobo. What the hell is a bunch of weak-sound nin doing in this village? Sasuke managed to cut in, bending his body slightly low and preparing for a sprint in a sudden notice. The one with the 6 arms smirked wickedly. Oh ho, so the little boy thinks he can wear his big britches now, huh? He thinks he's playing in the big leagues now, huh? The one with the 2 heads then chuckled as he continued, why don't we see that swag in action, then? In a flash, all 4 ninjas jumped from the tree as Sasuke vanished from his location via a very quick and silent Shunshin no jutsu, and all at once came down to the slowest of the 4 with an overhead strike. His Sharingan spinning under the light of the moonlight, giving an eerie red and almost demonic-like glow. 3 Tomo were spinning in each eye, showing a fully matured set of Sharingan for the entire world to see. The fat one had no time to defend himself as the wooden sword swiped at his face twice, disorienting him before Sasuke slammed the wooden sword on the man's left shoulder, causing the fattest member of the Sound 4 to come crashing down before Sasuke disappeared once more and reappeared just in front of the 6-armed man and giving Of quick and rapid three elbow strikes on the torso before Sasuke weaved around the sound nin and swung his bakken horizontally hitting the man square on his lower back and Sasuke whacked the man on the head for good measure causing the man to fall to his knees and Sasuke kicking the man square on the abdomen making the six-armed man lose a bit of air from his lungs and Sasuke hitting the back of the man's head with the sword's hilt and embedding the man's face on the tree's trunk with it. Sasuke then jumped. His image in the air spun as the full moon encircled his entire being as if the moon itself danced along with him and encircling him before Sasuke disappeared once more via Shunshin no Jutsu and performed a thrusting maneuver onto the girl's abdomen sending her flying back and Sasuke followed through by introducing his right foot to her face and stomping it on the wooden hollow branch. The girl went through the hollow branch and crashed to the one beneath it without as much as a grunt of pain. Sasuke then turned around. Sharingan still spinning and scanning all around him and saw the two-headed man charge at him with fists flying. Sasuke simply twirled the wooden sword in his hand and threw the said weapon on the man's face. His target evaded well enough but Sasuke immediately entered and bypassed all of his defenses when the said boy gave a simple punch to his chest. The man staggered a little as Sasuke vanished again and reappeared behind him. Wooden sword in his mouth Sasuke grabbed the man on the back by the shirt and flipped the man upwards as Sasuke once more jumped and performed the Shunshin. He reappeared in midair facing his target and furiously swung the wooden sword at Sakin in relentless fashion, whirling around giving hit after hit as they both descended. Sumuji Otoshi, whirling drop. Sasuke ended his strikes by slamming the sword on the man's neck as they crashed onto the ground. The boy jumped back and looked at his handiwork. Sasuke merely gave a grunt and said, "You're Orochimaru's best. Sound won't last long, then. If this is the best you can do, then it is better I put you out of your miseries." As Sasuke grabbed a kunai from his pouch, the four who were down on the ground suddenly moved and jumped back. When they stood up and were made visible to see, Sasuke was scowling. Marks of the cursed seal were present in all of them and half of their faces were littered with little black spots of varying patterns. Thus Sasuke began weaving hand signs in order to stop them then and there but was interrupted by the man with 6 arms. Wait. We've already tested you and find you worthy of Orochimaru-sama's attention. Orochimaru-sama has ordered us to retrieve you, Uchiha Sasuke. For you will serve as the vessel for him in exchange for power. Sasuke was raising his left eyebrow for this. What could he possibly gain by going to a village that didn't seem much in comparison? True. Being Orochimaru's apprentice did have some appeal, but then again, after seeing these four in action, he could guess he could only gain so little as compared to the options he was presented here. But the idea to learn more about the cursed seal was an intriguing prospect. If he could obtain the proper knowledge of it, it would ultimately be useful in his agendas. The pesky seal had been bothering for quite some time and though he chose to ignore this pesky problem, it would always come back to remind him with a vengeance by incorporating pain while he trained. He would sometimes twitch and grit his teeth as he tried to endure it, never letting anyone see his moment of weakness and suppressed any thoughts that made the seal active. He would be successful multiple times in pushing it back but it would still elicit pain when it wanted. It annoyed Sasuke that he would have to endure and not know many details about the pesky seal for a good long while until he or the village found a way to remove it. So when the opportunity presented itself to him about knowing more about the seal, he made little arguments within himself and proceeded to jump at the chance. This seal, if I go to you, will I be able to control it? The man with 6 arms nodded with a grin and added, not only that, it lets you go into a more powerful state in its second stage. The fact that you beat us with just your skill and a single jutsu means nothing until you have faced our strongest forms. You'd need a seal's help in order to beat me. The more you talk the more I see that ninjas of your village could only be subpar at best unless it's your leader. How is that village still standing? Sasuke decided not to speak his thoughts about it and simply said to them, wait for me by the western gate at 2 in the morning. I will gather my things and take all my necessities then. With that, Sasuke vanished via Shunshin and made way to his compound. But not before he makes a detour towards Anbu headquarters. Falcon was reading the current mission reports coming from his fellow members that night. Most of the stuff in these papers would be either burned or put in a special folder for classified documents. He had expected he would have a silent and lonely night to read but never expected to have his only trainee come back to base. Falcon found this peculiar and decided to stand up from his seat but Sasuke spoke first. I have something that you might want to know about. After several minutes of discussions and questioning coming from Falcon, the said Anbu member gave a nod and said to Sasuke, "Very well then, you will take it upon yourself to learn more information about one of our most wanted criminals' recruitment methods. We have extensive studies on the cursed seal due to Sandaime Sama's pursuit, but we lack further understanding in how it works and how we could remove them. I will let you in on your little suggestion. But expect a backup team to arrive coming from Hokage-sama herself." Sasuke raised an eyebrow at this and Falcon immediately replied as if he read Sasuke's mind. "Information about the seal is vital, don't get me wrong. It is so vital, that we need all the safeguards and measures that we will take in securing that information in order to deal a blow to Orochimaru. Single operatives work alone when it is sabotage and information gathering in one place, but you are about face a host of other variables and we would not be willing to risk the life of one of Konoha's most promising shinobi and lose that chance forever." To this, Falcon grabbed a mask and placed it in Sasuke's hands that looked surprised by his statements and looked down at it. It was the mask of a hawk. "You have earned the right to wear this mask. The mindset of any member of this squad is loyalty and duty. You must be loyal to your village and to your comrades, and duty must come first, for it is our responsibility to protect this village." To this Sasuke gave a hard nod and turned back. Falcon then added one more line to put Sasuke's head back on his shoulders. "But it doesn't mean that you have earned to be on real Anbu missions, kid. You have yet to cross that long and arduous path. When you come back here, I expect you to have performed your mission well." Sasuke, without a word, dashed outside as Falcon grabbed a scroll and began writing the details he needed to send the boy the proper backup. Sasuke arrived at the western gate at 2 in the morning as he had promised, and the 4 Oto nin nodded at him. To his back was his real sword, the katana that his mother had. The one with the 6 arms spoke, "Before we get started, you should familiarize with the 4 gate guardians of sound. I am Kidomaru of the East Gate. I'm Sakin of the West Gate." The one with the blue straight hair said as he prepared the small wooden barrel laden with paper seals and long-winded scarlet writings encompassing it. "Jirobo of the Southern Gate," the fat one said as he helped Sakin uncover the lid. "I'm Tayuya of the Northern Gate," the only female of the group said as she adjusted her headgear and served as additional lookout. Sasuke merely gave a nod. Sakin spoke up as he looked back at the village from a good distance. "It's good that you chose to side with us. If you remained in that village, you would have been held back." Sasuke was about to retort that they relied only on a seal with unknown consequences at the least in order to best someone like him, but held himself back. It would be better if he were to keep things to himself until he had full understanding and access to this vaunted second level of the cursed seal. Just what is required in order to attain the full power of the cursed seal? Sasuke asked. The 4 looked at each other before looking back at Sasuke. Sasuke had a feeling in his gut that he was not going to like any of the procedures one bit. Unknown place. Naruto was panting. He had been fighting for several hours straight. He had no orientation to time due to the place having no clock and not even a goddamn calendar. But the multiple cuts all around his body were healing at an incredible rate. As soon as he was cut, his wound would immediately start to heal in a rapid rate. His wound still bled as all hell and it still hurts like a bitch whenever he was cut down hard. When the man said that he was dead set on Naruto in his training, the man meant it to an extreme degree. His opponent had been instructed to go all out and the masked boy delivered. The boy combined jutsu with his already deadly swordplay. If it weren't for his continuously evolving reflexes and physical prowess, he would have already died within 5 minutes. He was clearly the one at the disadvantage, but he somehow got the patterns on how his enemy and his jutsu attacked. The lions were easy to read. They would pounce at him and aim for his neck as would real predators do in the wild by puncturing and crushing the windpipe. The masked nin would mix up his attacks with additional ink creatures to either to corner him, put him in a vulnerable position, create an opening or protect their creator. Naruto had to admit that the way the boy used his jutsu was almost as indicative as Naruto's use of the Kage Bunshin. He had to respect that. Even though now he was on the receiving end of that particular skill in style, and it annoyed him to high hell just how attentive and cautious he had to be. It drove him nuts that he couldn't touch the boy and end the fight there. It seemed that he wasn't the only one taking notes. The birds of prey were much easier, he could see them coming anytime he would turn. They would strike to his blind spots, but he was always ready for them. Whenever he would mix and match up his four-legged beasts and his avian creations, they were an absolute nightmare to deal with. Thankfully, the birds of prey also provided a platform to land on for him to either catch a breather for a moment or make his way to the masked nin, who had now made it a priority to let his bird swoop down perpendicular to where he was. Yep, the boy did his homework all right. This fucking annoying piece of shit jutsu that is just as so fucking useful as my cage bunshin is driving me nuts. Naruto then found some form of sympathy for the opponents he had faced since implementing this kind of system. Except for Kabuto, that jerkoff can die in a fucking ditch somewhere. Naruto ducked as a swipe from an ink lion went straight to his face. In quick succession, Naruto slammed his right shoulder on the creature's underbelly with enough force that it dispelled with a splash of black ink. Naruto spun around, his bare feet making a dust cloud as he positioned himself and jumped just as another ink bird swooped down to him with its razor-sharp talons. Naruto, like clockwork, landed on the bird's back and slammed his forearms down with enough force to shatter stone, and it dispelled once more with a stream of jet black ink. Naruto growled in annoyance when he noticed two shadows getting larger as two ink lions jumped at him from behind. Naruto merely stepped back as the pounce failed as the blonde prisoner grabbed one of the ink lion's tails and, as a show of strength, swung the ink lion to its partner as they both turned to streams of ink down on the ground. Then he felt something sting his back from his right shoulder blade down to his lower left flank. He felt a shower of blood spilt on the ground as the bandages around his torso tore and fell down. Gah, that seriously stung. Damn it. I need to stop him here and now. Naruto turned around, as seconds turned to minutes and time slowed down for him. The masked ninja was aiming a thrust to his face to kill him there. The masked ninja aimed for his left eye, but his body reacted quick enough to have slightly tilt his head to the right and cutting a bit of his left ear. Blood seemed to drip as the both of them stopped. The masked shinobi then tried to pull his right arm buck but found it unable to do so. Because somehow, Naruto had trapped his elbow in the link of chains of his handcuffs and looped around his said appendage in a tight grip. The masked ninja also found it bent in an interesting way, when Naruto decided to bring it down to his knee and slammed it on his elbow with a jump, loosening the masked ninja's grip on his sword. When the sword fell, Naruto was quick to capitalize and slammed his left fist on the boy's mask hard, disorienting him as the porcelain mask cracked a little as he staggered back. Naruto then followed it up with a kick to the boy's abdomen, sending him skidding back several meters before he was punched in the gut, sending him up as Naruto kicked him on the chin, with the porcelain mask flying. The masked nin recovered well enough, but Naruto wasn't done as he introduced his left foot on the boy's face, sending him flying back. Naruto then jumped before stomping on the agent's abdomen with a loud thud. The masked nin grunted when Naruto stomped on him. He coughed out violently as blood leaked from his mouth. In the blonde's right hand was his short sword, intending to strike him down. Naruto pressed his right foot to add a little pressure on the neck of the black-haired boy, blood dripping from the mouth as Naruto placed the small sword in a reverse grip and swung the blade in a stabbing motion straight to the unnamed ninja's chest. But Naruto never followed through. It stopped just several inches above to where Naruto would have punctured the heart. "This is my win, again," Naruto said, and the now formerly masked ninja looked into the apathetic features of the blonde. His sword was in the container's hands now. He didn't have the advantage of reach and lethality anymore. He had also exhausted himself to the point of his muscles stiffening and having no chakra left. "Why do you not finish me off?" Naruto merely threw the knife away and walked to the other side of the room with a frown as he said to the assassin, "Those who do not have their own beliefs and fight solely in the name of a bastard like him, they're not worth killing, just like you. What you should be getting from me is not a fight, but pity." Naruto then sat on the floor as he looked back to the ninja. "Tell your boss that he can go fuck himself if he thinks he can just let someone be killed for something as trivial as training. He's no better than those bastards at Kiri who were forced to kill each other in order to graduate." Naruto took a deep breath as he looked up. The weight was killing him. "I'll never get the logic of wasting someone just to prime them for missions. Everybody's got a plan after all, that is until they get punched in the face." Naruto then scowled as he pointed and said to the boy, "Now, get out. If you want to fight me again, then you better have a damn good reason. I'm not going to fight a lackey that his boss could just throw away." The boy stood up and got out of the room, completely defeated and utterly humiliated as he staggered away. Naruto remained in the room trying to get his bearings. He had been mentally exhausted just trying to keep up against his opponent earlier. Although he had unbelievable levels of stamina, it was still finite and he knew that he would tire out faster as he was always on the move. Although the boy used his jutsu only several times, the fact that he could maintain them long enough to keep him busy was a sign that the kid he was fighting was learning. It would only be a matter of time that either he would be forced to kill the black-haired boy or he becomes the one who gets a sword shoved through his throat. Either way, both scenarios were something he would want to avoid. He turned back, exhausted but triumphant once more. In the earlier days of his mentally exhausting trials here, he would always lose consciousness and his bandages were replaced and he was hauled off into bed. He would wake up, in clean sets of bandages around his torso and sometimes his face and head with his wild blonde hair sticking out between the gaps. He would be given the chance to eat a hearty meal before an hour later, he would fight again. This time, it wouldn't be happening. There was no one to heal him now, not with this amount of defiance against this man. His time was running out. He needed to get out and soon. The seal has been deciphered and decoded. We now have a way to remove the seal manually by the captive. Naruto's vision changed, from the dull gray areas of his expansive prison to the dark alleyways of his mind. There, Ashura stood before him, still as ethereal as he ever was, and behind him was Kurama, who was in a sitting position with his hands closed. It was as if Kurama is currently meditating. Let's hear it, Naruto replied. First off, with your chakra suppressed, it prevents you from sending your chakra into the tenketsu that reside in your hands. It renders you useless in using your techniques, and the chakra is either merely redirected back at your arms or the seal feeds its multiple networks of runes that the chakra is simply dispersed. The reason why Kurama can't help you is because if he pumps more chakra into you, the seals just consume it the same way they do to your chakra, although on a much bigger scale and much stronger. Whenever Kurama sends his chakra, an extra network of runes is activated and they somewhat slow down the volatile chakra to a much more manageable state. Naruto nodded at that as he looked at Kurama, who kept building up on chakra. The thing is, the flaw in the seal lies in how much it can take, not how potent that chakra is, which makes it a little difficult to continuously apply chakra to it, also in part of your own seal too. And I don't mean you, I mean Kurama. It can handle well enough of Kurama's chakra, just about 1 to 3 amount worth of tails. Anything beyond that, the seals start to react and become disturbed. However, a certain fact has to be said, that the seals will take a long time to react due to its complex network, and it could burst your tenketsu, so there may be some pain. That's why Kurama has been gathering chakra and focusing it enough so that he can send a steady stream to your arms. Right now we're just waiting for you too. You are indeed a creature of poor reasoning, Uzumaki. I have tried relentlessly to put you in my good graces, yet here you are, spitting on my generosity. You have no idea how irked I am of your actions. Your obstinate actions have given me time in deciding one thing, that you are not worth keeping. Hashirama's cells are a waste of you. No matter, I'm willing to rectify this situation now. Just then, a multitude of the man's agents had appeared all around him, all wearing cloaks, thus obscuring his vision of their faces and masks. The boy from earlier wasn't in one of them. Naruto growled at the men and possibly women that surrounded him. They were adults in build, likely more experienced and much more dangerous than his previous opponent. This was bad. Anytime now, Naruto anxiously said to Ashura as the spirit turned to look at Kurama with a nod. Do it. Unfortunately, due to the seal's current state and his inexperience right now, there is no way for the boy to have some semblance of control over my chakra. He will have to endure the transformation I am about to introduce. I don't care. Just do it. Naruto shouted as he was soon swarmed by the agents with kunai and swords brandished against him to take him out. Kurama grumbled something about impatient and obstinate humans. Kurama, lend me your chakra, overpower this seal and let's get the fuck out of here. Naruto shouted as the agents swung down their blades on the boy with extreme prejudice. The sound of metal creaking and groaning as it seemed like it was bent and cracked was heard, and then the clanking of metal as it fell to the ground unceremoniously. AAARRRRRRRRGGGGHHH. B.A. dump. The familiarity of pain had hit him once more. His ear was ringing from the immense pain of having his tenketsu blown, cracking open so wide that they burst. He was getting dizzy as the world spun around him due to the pain and the blood loss. He could see the shackles falling down on the ground with a wet slop as his blood made it slide down. The cast iron metal was ruined beyond recognition, as if it was nothing more than paper. He looked at his arms. They were bloody and blood continued to spill. Not only were the tenketsu on his arms burst, the blood vessels nearby were heavily involved as well. He had no time to think though, as his entire consciousness faded to black from the shock. But that did not leave him completely vulnerable. As if the chakra had a mind of its own, it cocooned itself around the blonde and had let the blood from his hands float outwards to the outline of its immense and sinister power. The men were suddenly blown away when the burst of chakra had slammed into them as if they were met with an impervious brick wall, sending them from the epicenter of this explosion of power to the walls that look flimsier all of a sudden. The blood of the boy that reached the outlines of the red chakra sizzled and gave off a sound of 1,000 poisonous snakes hissing around him, covering the boy from head to toe and forming a set of ears constructed by chakra on the head. Black smoke suddenly solidified and surrounded the boy. Some of the members were quick to respond, familiarizing themselves on the nature of a jinchuriki. Sound the alarm. Sealing team, have a containment seal ready. But apparently, they weren't quick enough. The one who was communicating to the sealing team suddenly had an outside view of his heart before he twitched and collapsed down on the floor dead as a gigantic red hand made of chakra burst to his chest from his back. A mighty and earth-shaking roar echoed throughout the halls of the base as Kurama's animalistic wrath descended upon its dissidents in a show of blood and giblets. A macabre of a fox monster emerged from the orb with 4 tails swishing in the air. Its eyes were hollow white, empty and soulless, and a jagged maw that would intimidate anyone that came across it. The creature roared in fury once more as it released small orbs of chakra around it and then began concentrating them just above his mouth. The black orb of condensed biju chakra about the size of a closed fist emerged and it shook uncontrollably. The creature then opened its jagged mouth and bit on the orb. Smoke began rising from its mouth as the creature sat on all fours, and all around him, every single being that could stand around him fell on his or her knees from the density of chakra. A creature of poor reasoning indeed. Fire country. Hitaki Kakashi had looked worse for wear since his and Jiraiya's mission for the past 2 months. The utter drought of information that had been given to them brought him to the very edge of his patience. But like Tsunade and Jiraiya, he too became a firm believer that Naruto is alive somehow. The question was where to look. Jiraiya had said to him that he had never kept tabs on Danzo and that had been Sandaime-sama's work. While Jiraiya was handling business abroad, Hiruzen would monitor Danzo's movements. Of course, with Hiruzen's death, he also took Danzo's information to his grave before he could even finish it. Kakashi could not believe the immense levels of frustration coming from him. From his past experiences with Root, he could say that the only significant base they had was somewhere near Konoha. But of course, that would be not enough. Danzo was not one to put his eggs in one basket. No, the man had a way with getting what he wants and not leave tracks that could get back to him. He hid things in multiple places, thus making it difficult to determine just how deep the rabbit hole was in determining his strength. This made him utterly effective and at the same time, severely dangerous within and outside the walls of Konoha. Danzo was the perfect black ops agent and leader. He was quietly efficient but exceedingly brutal in his methods. His name in the underground world would be just about the same as in the infamy of a cage. If there was anything suspicious involved, anyone could bet that Danzo was sure to be part of it. That was how resonating the man's name was in the world of darkness, as he would like to put. Jiraiya knew of this all too well even before his exposure to Danzo's elite soldiers. The former teacher of the 4th Hokage had given him tips before when dealing with Root, and although Jiraiya had less encounters of them, he was quite aware of the many operations that the rival of Hiruzen had for many of his global operations. He was of course, the spymaster that Konoha turned to for intelligence gathering, and was also the man who taught both the reconnaissance and intelligence departments on espionage and subterfuge. Whenever something was too clean that even his network couldn't detect, he already knew who it was behind it. The fact that Tsunade had to inform him that the corpse that he thought was Naruto wasn't actually his godson made him think of the ever-elusive man who posed well as one of the council of elders for Hiruzen. If anyone could go beneath his radar, it had to be Danzo and his underground army. And he couldn't even touch Danzo because of his said position. So far, all he had were suspicions and conjectures, and even his sensei couldn't throw the damn book at his former rival. To be labeled as a traitor for killing Danzo would be the last thing he needed when his mind would be more focused on gathering the necessary intelligence to fight off the rising threat of Akatsuki that involved his not-so-dead-after-all godson. Jiraiya was seething at this, not because he was deceived, but the fact that Naruto is currently at the hands of the shadiest person in the village was enraging. Danzo had a way of bending truths to his advantage. He was very much like Orochimaru but much more destructive than his former teammate. And although Orochimaru could possibly take on Danzo, the latter was more prepared for every scenario than the former. He is every bit as ruthless and every bit as cunning as the man who would create Odo as a village. Danzo had been doing his job for at most half a century after all. 2 months and not a single clue. Most of the informants I've asked didn't know or haven't seen anything. Danzo knows all too well the blind spots on my net. Jiraiya said with lament as they jumped from branch to branch. Do you honestly believe Tsunade-sama's findings even though it seems like we're going around in circles? Kakashi asked to the older man who gave an unflinching nod. Tsunade may not be perfect but she's the most proficient doctor in all of Fire Country. She's has a knack for diagnosing, detecting and curing patients. If the DNA tests were fake then what she said is true. The sage of Myobokuzen said resolutely having faith in Tsunade's skills. Also, even though it might be cruel, at least Tsunade acted on a chance that the boy may be alive and that prick Danzo had a hand on his disappearance. Their conversation was suddenly cut short when they saw countless birds flying in the distance followed by the earth shaking wildly. Boom. Malicious chakra permeated in the air. Jiraiya could tell how wild and potent it was judging from the distance of where he saw the explosion. Jiraiya and Kakashi looked at each other and nodded. This was Kyuubi. The two men quickened their pace so as to see the resulting devastation of the Kyuubi running amok. Jiraiya was praying to the high heavens that everything would be alright. When they had arrived at the source and epicenter of the earthquake, the lump on Jiraiya's throat was gone when he saw a red and black creature in midair, firing a concentrated blast of dense chakra below him as it ascended upwards from the recoil of its attack. Boom. Another explosion rocked the earth as the dense chakra literally gave out and began ate up everything in its reach as it disintegrated those that were inside its explosive range. The creature landed at the edge of the destroyed crater. It growled menacingly as steam escaped from its jagged mouth and hollow white eyes staring at the ruined base or what was left of it. The creature then noticed 2 new entities on its front. It growled at them before it went silent. The tails swishing in the air slowly swayed before it was gone, flaking away like dead skin. And out of the blood-soaked monster was a heavily bandaged boy kneeling and looking straight up, arms riddled with wounds with large and deep craters in them. His face was covered with bandages and the only thing that made him recognizable was the spiky tuft of blonde hair over his head that had grown longer during his disappearance and wearing nothing only but pants. The boy collapsed in a heap as Jiraiya and Kakashi quickly made their way towards him. At last, they finally found him. Not too far from the site of destruction, 3 figures stood there and silently watched as the 2 elite ninjas from Konoha make their way towards the boy. What should we do, Danzo-sama? The elderly man answered it as if it was the most obvious answer in the world. We retreat and cut our losses. 50 shinobi is nothing compared if I die here today. Konoha. Morning had come with news of Sasuke sneaking out of the village courtesy of the Hokage and Shikamaru's team being assigned as backup. Apparently, Sasuke had been scheming to gather intelligence concerning the cursed seal and was advised by Tsunade to observe the situation and only to intervene when the situation becomes dire. He was basically on a very dangerous reconnaissance mission and he found it within him to punch Sasuke in the face for his harebrained ideas. To his front were a group that he had to make as a team for the backup for the last but questionably loyal Uchiha at this point. He eyed each one of them, Kiba, Neji, Choji, Lee, Tenten and Sakura. He would have chosen much less, but Tsunade recommended at least a long-range specialist and the ever-crucial medic in the form of Sakura. So he complied. He didn't really like arguing with women. Although if Sakura's equipment told him anything, it's that Sakura was more ready to cut people down rather than stitch them back together. Tenten on the other hand, began checking her scrolls to see if they were filled to the brim with weapons she'll be using just in case. He had worked once with Tenten before, and he found it unsettling that Tenten was preparing and getting excited at the just-in-case scenario. Granted, there was a high chance of fighting the ones who have Sasuke, but he would want to avoid unnecessary fights if he could. There was a peculiar scroll though, that caught his interest as he watched the girl adjust her arsenal. Out of the rest of the team, Tenten had to be the most armed to the teeth. Her teeth probably had weapons in them too if given the chance. He had heard her saying that it was a bow but didn't have a quiver and added that she didn't need one. Shino may have been a fine choice, perhaps it would have been more balanced instead of 4 close-range fighters, but the said boy was out on a mission since being recommended as Chunin and he wouldn't be back for several more days. Hinata had refused politely, she had things to do and the Hyuga clan had outright lent them Neji instead, so it wasn't as if he had been gimped by them. Ino wouldn't be participating. Shikamaru had already warned her that she wouldn't be of use in this mission. She had a different skill set altogether and adding her would have caused more headaches and scramble more variables than he would like. Shikamaru then looked at the sky as a thought had entered his head. He gave a wry grin. I'm envious, you know. You get to relax for the rest all you want, but this kind of mission would have been right up your alley. Shikamaru looked at the group behind him as he turned around. Tsunade-sama has assigned us as a reconnaissance and backup team for Uchiha Sasuke, who thought that it was a damn good idea to go on his own again while we save his scrawny ass, again. Shikamaru looked annoyed as he turned to Sakura and asked, is your boyfriend always like this? Sakura gave a nervous chuckle, he has his moments. But he means well, it's just how he thinks. And he's not my boyfriend. Not yet, anyway. She said that sentence at the end with a blush. I was hoping that you wouldn't deny that last part. Tenten said as she looked at Sakura with a sly grin. Hoping. I'm surprised she even denied it. Kiba said with a chuckle, earning a glare from Sakura. Can't a girl have some moment of peace without talking about my love life? Choji looked thoughtful. Well, your motivation as a kunoichi was an integral part of your character, Sakura. To say that you would deny claims of being Sasuke's girlfriend, well, it's really hard to swallow, you know. Neji frowned at this. Don't tell me this is about your guilt. Sakura shook her head. It's not, and I'm sure. Naruto wouldn't want me to be this way. Even Sasuke-kun helped me. What I want to do now. Sakura looked at her right hand and clenched it hard. Is to obtain the strength necessary enough to protect everyone. Shikamaru smirked. Well then, I guess I can't really fault you there. So be prepared, we're going in for another dangerous mission. He said that last sentence to all the members of this backup team. Yes, and for this, we will succeed. This is my promise to everyone. Lee mentioned with a smile and a thumbs up. Again with the nice guy pose, Tenten said in exasperation as all of them vanished and the leaves danced with the wind. Naruto. Naruto slowly regained consciousness. Thoughts of how he survived his ordeal seemed to litter his mind as he a familiar heard a voice speak from the darkness. Tsunade-sama gave me an update and a mission. It seems one of my students suggested they take a mission that involves gathering intelligence from one of our most dangerous enemies and the Hokage has decided to send back up. A familiar voice he hadn't heard for so long. It was Kakashi. Wait, someone from his team is gathering intelligence as a mission. And he or she is against one of their most dangerous enemies yet. Is it Sasuke? And, you're the one she's sending as backup. Another familiar voice, he could tell it was Jiraiya. The man had a voice that you could recognize anywhere. Yes, it is Sasuke and unfortunately, no, I'm not. I was assigned on an S-class mission after our mission report. I'm not going to be the one who will serve as backup. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow at this. Just a day and you're already being reassigned. I would like to think that this mission was no cakewalk. I'm afraid so. Unfortunately, I have to take the mission because of we have very little manpower even though we're high in demand. I also imagine that Tsunade-sama is angry because this mission was also a failure in a way. We failed to gather evidence of what we could link to Danzo and Naruto's kidnapping. Jiraiya gave a sigh at this. I told her already that we couldn't find anything. And the remains on the site of where we found Naruto were obliterated without a trace. That Bijudama that happened yesterday destroyed everything and from the looks of it, the boy did it twice making sure nothing remains. There might be survivors, but they've already fled and those 2 injured to move committed suicide due to seal that destroyed their entire being. It was then that Naruto chose this time to stand up from his bed. His face was still covered with bandages. What's this I hear about Sasuke gathering information? I see you're awake boy, but don't bother going after them, not in your condition. Jiraiya said to the boy as Naruto frowned. I'm fine. I don't need to rest, I've got plenty since, how long was I out? Jiraiya looked at the clock and then back to the boy. About 12 hours, kid. I have to say I'm impressed with your healing factor, it wasn't that fast before. Naruto scowled as he looked down. That's because some asshole decided to shove the Shodime Hokage's cells within me. Apparently it worked well enough, but you can see that there are gray patches on my chest and belly. Jiraiya and Kakashi looked at each other alarmed as they both frowned. Who did this to you? Jiraiya asked and his voice was shaking with anger. If this was Danzo's handiwork, there would be hell to pay. Orochimaru was the only one known in the village who had successfully cultivated Hashirama's cells. Any and all experiments done by him were destroyed, and that included Hashirama's DNA. Tenzo was the last person known to have been injected with those cells, and he barely made it out alive. If the man had access to such a thing, it would spell danger to Tsunade. I don't know. The guy was fucking creepy and said a lot of horrible things I'm not supposed to know. Like what? Kakashi asked. Naruto looked at Jiraiya and Kakashi and then sighed. Forget it, I don't want to talk about it right now. I have a job to do. Jiraiya scowled at this. Your job is to get back to Konoha so that Tsunade can see what adverse effects there are concerning you and your new predicament. You can't just do things like this on a whim. Naruto turned around to Jiraiya and raised his voice. I very damn well can. I don't need people who need tell me what's good for me. Let me decide things for myself just for once. Naruto, what are you? Jiraiya was about to reply, but he was cut off when Naruto stood up. Talk later. I'm doing this whether both of you don't like it or not. This is for me to decide. I'm a Chunin now, damn it. I know the results of what my actions might do and I'm prepared to face the consequences. I knew this before I became a ninja, and I'm sick of people who still treat me like a child by keeping secrets from me. Oh, now there would be hell to pay indeed. If Danzo spilled the beans on Naruto's status and the state secrets that involved him, then he and Tsunade would need to plot for Danzo's downfall. Slowly, meticulously, they would have to do it. He would need to gather the right amount of evidence to do it too. But for now, he would have no choice. Naruto knew something he shouldn't have, and whether he would knock the boy out or not, he would still find a way to escape his grasp and go after his peers. With a sigh, Jiraiya unfurled a scroll and unsealed its contents. A cloud of smoke appeared and out came a set of Naruto's uniform complete with all the essential ninja gear he would need and a pair of peculiar single-edged knives that have hand guards that run parallel to the hilt. The ring at the bottom of the hilt made it resemble a kunai, but the boy knew that this was something else. He gripped the twin blades and found them much lighter than an average kunai. The color was much lighter too, a good silver with stainless steel-like texture. The grip was good and made the way it was to indicate that it was more of a close-range weapon rather than long-range. Kakashi performed a summoning technique and out of the cloud of smoke came Pakun. We can't stop you, Naruto, you've made up your mind long ago. You told us by your words that you are willing to face the consequences. At least let me help you by having Pakun with you to track down your teammate. Naruto stood up and grabbed his clothes as Jiraiya mentioned to him in a smirk. Fine, be that way. Just know that you willing to take punishment from the Hokage make you an adult in my eyes, now. So go, before I change my mind and restrain you here with duct tape. Naruto gave a nod as he put on his vest and adjusted his foreign protector. Jiraiya noticed the longer hair and the way the boy adjusted his vest reminded him of the Yondaime Hokage. He looked at Kakashi who had the same feeling as well. A feeling of nostalgia escaped Kakashi as Naruto walked out of the room followed by Pakun, and with the words that echoed to him coming from his sensei and from Naruto, he could hear the man's voice just the same as Naruto uttered those words to them. Don't worry, I'll be back in a flash. Chapter 15. This Winding Road, Part 1. Hokage Tower. Morning. Tsunade had just received word via Kakashi's summon that they have recovered Naruto, alive and in one piece. A big sigh of relief escaped her. Naruto was alive. He had escaped and caused enough of a ruckus for Jiraiya and Kakashi to investigate. But the other objective that she had assigned the two was not met. Kakashi had explicitly stated that every chance to discover a root base had been all for nothing. They had no leads other than the last scent that Naruto gave off when he was placed in a body bag. Jiraiya's network was of no help either. Jiraiya had stated that his network mostly works outside the borders of Fire Country. For the inside jobs, Hiruzen covered for him, but after the death of the Sandaime, he had no time since then to allocate some of his resources back in Fire Country. What little information he could scrounge up was negligible and unhelpful at best. When the two shinobi found Naruto, the base that he was allegedly staying at was obliterated down to atoms courtesy of an out-of-control Kyuubi inside the blonde that he had apparently used. There was nothing left of the base that could incriminate Danzo, and it was one of the frustrations that she was having right now aside from another report that Kakashi turned in before he took his reassignment for another mission. Apparently, Naruto recovered in just one day and had decided to pursue Shikamaru's group to provide backup out of defiance against Jiraiya. Both shinobi had suspected that Danzo may have poisoned the blonde's mind with state secrets that he wasn't supposed to know at a certain period of time. This would normally be a problem if Naruto was on active duty. But during his apparent death, he was listed in the killed in action list. She had been secretly having Kakashi and Jiraiya scour the entire country in finding the boy, and the results that she had was not placed in the official records. Instead, she had created a forged copy and placed it in the file. Who knows what kind of people would be snooping around in reading the files that she knew was confidential. The only people that she knew who had the correct files were herself, Kakashi, and Jiraiya. And she kept those files hidden exceptionally well and close to her. When Naruto had woken up, Jiraiya could tell that there was a certain level disillusion coming from the boy, and he was treating both Jiraiya and Kakashi as someone he couldn't completely trust as opposed to before his kidnapping. It was troubling indeed. She needed to look at the journals the Sandaime had made for 13 years since the attack of the Kyuubi on Konoha. Naruto would remain untouchable for the most part due to a technicality. She grinned when Kakashi had stated that Naruto was willing to accept the consequences of his actions. A brat he may be sometimes, but when the boy said those words, she couldn't help but smile. The boy was growing up despite his petulance. For now she would continue to look at her paperwork. Eventually, Danzo would slip, and when he does, Tsunade was ready to put a hit on the man. She would not take this lying down. Shikamaru's group. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Sakura looked up and the dome of earth had them covered completely. They were detected and captured by the enemy after observing them for the whole night. Shikamaru had developed a contingency plan just in case, but even a great tactician would fail if he didn't know much of the variables that he was presented with. Flashback. His decisions had been sound thus far. From formations to their actions, Shikamaru always took the prudent road and decided to gather more data based on what the enemy could do. But it was clear that their enemy was better. They were detected by a very thin and almost unnoticeable thread of spider web. The webs that were near invisible were tensile enough that even steel couldn't even break them easily. It became clear that ever since they had arrived, they were already detected. They just wanted to see what their enemy was about to do. When the six-armed man pulled altogether 6 people with his webs, Sakura knew they were already backed against the wall. Without the element of surprise anymore, they were already at a disadvantage. And with very little skill shown by the Odo shinobi, it meant that they were indeed not a group to be underestimated. The 4 shinobi looked at them with sinister grins on their faces, as if they were just handed with the most delectable of prey. Well, look at what my webs just caught. I thought we would be in for an interesting fight, but it looks like we got served with more Konoha garbage and even worse than last time. The 6-armed man smirked as the one with blue hair gave a chuckle. Good timing. I need something to let loose some steam. This is a fucking waste of time. The coffin is of the essence. Orochimaru-sama has ordered us to deliver Sasuke on schedule. This will only take a few seconds. The man with the blue hair charged at the group with his left arm drawn back and throwing away caution to the wind. Shikamaru saw this as a sign of insult that their enemy was underestimating them. Judging from the one charging, he could say that the one with the blue hair that carried something like a head on his back was a taijutsu specialist. Shikamaru gave his best damn poker face as the first one charged. He didn't know what was in store for him the minute he realizes that he had close-range fighters of varying degrees of specialties in his disposal. Terenkan, Mach Fist. His fists were suddenly a blur as if they were multiplying as he shoved his arm forward. Unfortunately for him, he wouldn't be able to connect as Lee had suddenly intercepted the punch, or rather several punches, with his right arm that moved in quick and precise patterns and angles. I can see your movements, Lee said as he moved forward as he got in close and punched Sakin in the stomach. The blue-haired man blocked the punch and seemed quite amused and impressed by the bowl-cut boy's reflexes and speed. Oh. So you're not just garbage after all. Shikamaru for his part gestured to Choji with his neck as the boy complied with a nod. The boy nodded as Shikamaru replied, "Your mistake was that you thought you had us when we were caught and made a move first. Your second mistake was that clearly you underestimated us, thinking you could take us down just because we're younger." Choji suddenly grew his arms and slammed them on the ground, creating a dust cloud. Kidomaru smirked. They were stupid enough to cast a distraction when they were obviously trapped by his threads. How arrogant could you get? When he pulled the strings, he had realized that they had all been replaced by rocks caused by the large boy's distraction. Suddenly surprised by all this, Kimimaro spat out 4 spiked boomerangs from his mouth and threw them at the improvised smokescreen. They were then intercepted by a batch of 4 kunai from it. Then, 2 flying drills charged through the smoke and flew at their nearest target, Saken. In quick succession, the blue-haired man ducked from the attack as Lee kept pressuring him with several punches that left him quite open to Kiba's attack. Saken, then instead of parrying and defending himself, decided to jump away at a safe distance. Sweden. Ryusui no Mai, water release. Dance of the flowing water. Tenten slid through the smoke, Suiginto, mercurial blade, in hand and a splash of surging water beneath her feet and reaching to her knees. She glided on the ground, earning more speed and less friction as she charged. Kidomaru acted quickly and began attacking her with his spiked boomerangs. But Tenten gracefully evaded them gracefully as if she was skating on ice, and the blade in her hands glowed blue as she did so. When she got close, it was then that Jirobo touched the ground and flipped a perfectly rectangular wall of earth beneath him. Doden. Doroku Geishi, earth release. Earth wall land flip. Clang. Suiginto may be a sharp blade, but it cannot cut solid stone. Surprised by this, Tenten was suddenly attacked by the red-headed girl as she charged at her with a kunai straight to her face. Clang. The sound of metal clashing against metal was all Tenten heard when Sakura blocked the red-head woman's attack by brandishing her twin double-edged swords. With a grit of her teeth, Sakura pushed the woman away and attacked her, but was intercepted by their largest hostile combatant. Jirobo had burst from the earth that he treated like a tatami mat. The earth shattered as a brute show of strength overwhelmed Sakura, who twisted herself around as Jirobo charged with his shoulder drawn. Tenten reacted quick and swung her nodashi sideways at the large man, who simply ducked below and continued his charge at the two of them. The large man gave Tenten a shoulder charge to her gut that pushed the air out of her lungs, sending her flying back and skidding on the ground as Sakura narrowly dodged a powerful palm strike from the man by leaning back that destroyed a few strands of her hair. A little more and that would have completely torn my head off. Sakura thought, thanking Tsunade's vicious training method in dodging. A common tactic for medic ninja was that they were usually held back in order to be the last person to be gravely injured. But she wasn't just a medic ninja. She was a combat medic ninja. She had learned to heal even though still very early in her training stages with the Hokage. She could heal shallow and small cuts and a few dislocated bones. She was still far from treating patients with shock and compound fractures. But she learned advanced combat from Kakashi. Due to the man's methods, she had far better reflexes than she should have, and it made Tsunade's training much more bearable than what it should be. Perhaps she had gotten used to the training of learning Kakashi's suggested style, but the way she could dodge even just a hairline of anything that the Hokage can throw at her at lower levels was something that Tsunade was quite pleased and proceeded to increase the difficulty. It was as if it was a knock-off of the Sharingan's clairvoyant abilities. Sakura jumped back when the red-headed woman pounced at her as she swung a kunai at her with her left hand. Only to be dragged down to the ground when Kidomaru threw a thread and latched it onto her. Sakura stumbled as she tried to get up when the red-head girl was on top of her with a kunai about to impale her in the face. But it wouldn't be as Neji took this opportunity to counter with a palm strike on the girl's torso, but the girl jumped back. Neji had cut the threads of webbing on her left heel and proceeded to grab Tenten, who was recovering as they retreated. He hasn't realized it yet, but I now understand the premise of the technique. I thank you for providing me enough time to decipher some of their skills. Tenten huffed. The next time Shikamaru proposes something like this, then he can do it himself. Nikuden Sensha, human meatball tank. Choji, now an overgrown ball, soared through the air and bounced as he landed on the ground, creating a small crater beneath him as he charged at the 3 of the 4 sound ninja. Jirobo was prepared to stop the boy when he was distracted by Tenten, who unleashed a hail of kunai and shuriken. Instead of being able to stop the rampaging Konoha genin, he could only dodge the hail of knives and shuriken from Tenten's quick-draw hands from her scrolls. The rain of metal stopped when Choji followed through as he charged ahead to Kidomaru and to Yuya. Gritting and cursing through their teeth, Kidomaru and to Yuya jumped back as Choji went for a sweep all the way towards Sakin, who was having a hard time in trying to get through to Lee's quick defensive parries and counters. Fortunately, Sakin wasn't hit yet. Unfortunately, he could not dish out in time as Lee quickened his pace. It was like the boy was throwing him off guard as he continued to quicken his movements and throwing Sakin out of his sync. And then that duo that had the speed and agility to land shallow cuts with their claws would appear and try to render him limb from limb. Sakin found it absolutely annoying that these two were seriously very speed-oriented like he was. When Choji was about to crash to him, Sakin jumped and landed beside Yuya as Choji returned to where Shikamaru was, who smirked at them. The only Chunin in the group then said, "All this power, all these options presented, yet you Oto shinobi fail against people who know how to do shit, seasoned shinobi my ass." Suddenly, a dark pathway expanded from Shikamaru as all four shinobi from sound were incapacitated by Shikamaru's jutsu. Kage main no jutsu, shadow imitation technique, as a success. Yuya grew angry as she looked down. The boy's smug was really getting on her nerves. "You're the ones who are selling us short, you fucking rat." Suddenly, Jirobo had escaped the hold on him as he shouted and slammed his hands on the ground with great force that the ground beneath him slowly began forming cracks and then shattered completely. Doden. Ritsudo Tensho, Earth Release. Tearing Earth Turning Palm. The earth suddenly turned around Shikamaru, and the others were too surprised by such a feat that the designated leader of Konoha's team had no time to think of a backup plan when they suddenly lost their balance as Jirobo shouted the name of the technique. Cutting themselves loose from Shikamaru's shadow, the remaining three looked towards the destroyed earth as Jirobo stood on top of its crater. "Go on ahead. I'll catch up to you later." The three members of the Sound Four looked on each other and then back to Jirobo, who began weaving another set of seals. Kidomaru smirked. "Don't tell me you plan on eating their chakra, Jirobo. We're on a tight schedule here. I'll be fine. I'll get rid of them." Wordlessly, the three remaining members grabbed the wooden barrel they left at their campsite as Kidomaru strapped the thing on his back. Doden. Dorodomu Earth Release. Earth Prison Dome. Rocks began creating formations as they began piling on one another until they covered the entirety of Konoha's backup team. Flashback end. Sakura stared up at the dome as all 7 of them were entrapped in this small prison. They were unmistakably overwhelmed. The fact that someone could break up the grip of Shikamaru's jutsu was a testament to their level of skill and power. She was starting to think that they were way out of their league. She glanced to her left side and saw the members were on their own, coming with multiple ways on how to escape this prison. Neji had his Byakugan activated, looking at the dome with curiosity. He found it strange that the flow of chakra seemed a lot more on the side where the man was conveniently located, and on the other end, it was as thin as a sheet of paper. He also noticed that their chakra was slowly being siphoned from their bodies and flow into the stream of chakra on their earthen roof and then coming to a head towards their captor. "It seems the man is draining our chakra and using it to feed himself," Neji reported to Shikamaru, who raised an eyebrow at this as he looked at Tenten, who was rummaging through her scrolls and finding a ream of exploding tags. "We can't be having that for now. If anything, we don't know if our oxygen supply is limited here. If we blow this thing up, we would either be crushed or we suffocate. So we can't use any Kaiden jutsus for this one." Tenten clicked her tongue in annoyance as Shikamaru was silently looking around with his mind running through multiple ideas that he thinks might work. There has to be a purpose why there's chakra surrounding this dome and not just our chakra being siphoned. It was then that Kiba went on all fours and shouted to everyone in the dome, "Whatever you're cooking up, Shikamaru, it has to be quick. I'll try and force my way out." Kiba then jumped and whirled around, performing the piercing fang as it drilled all around the dome. Shikamaru's thoughts turned to the aftermath, to the areas where Kiba was hitting. He could see spirals carving out from the earth and denting it even a little. A few minutes later, Kiba got tired of doing the same strategy and sat down. Frustration was ever present as he growled and gritted his teeth beside Akamaru. Shikamaru soon took notice of the damage Kiba has done. Before he could say anything, Sakura was the one to speak first. "I think I get why chakra is surrounding this dome. Sakura then said as she grabbed one of her swords and impaled it to the nearest wall to where Kiba had tried to drill out of. All of them could see the earth slowly regaining its form before Kiba tried to pierce through. The chakra he's using acts like a healing jutsu. It's basically self-repairing whenever we try to do any damage to it. Shikamaru had said as he then looked at Neji. Find the weakest area of the chakra dome, the one where the point of chakra saturation is the thinnest. Neji then pointed towards the area opposite to where he was facing. Over there, just a meter above Lee. Choji, try to break the wall. Everybody else, steer clear of the area where Choji is going to plow through. Choji then nodded and turned to the area where the wall was the weakest and expanded his body once more. Baika no Jutsu, multi-size expansion technique. Growing into a ball, Choji then charged at the wall as he spun madly. Nikuden Sensha, meatball tank. Pretty soon, the ball broke through and the rest of the team charged outside before the jutsu collapsed in on itself. Behind the dome, Jirobo was surprised. He had never thought that a bunch of brats would figure out the small technique that was vital for this jutsu. Neji, can you locate the others? Neji shook his head. Unfortunately, they have made their escape to leave us here with their accomplice. What? Then we should go after them now. Kiba shouted as Jirobo had cut them off of their impromptu conference. You bunch of trash are not going anywhere. This is where you're going to die. The man then touched the ground once more as veins began bulging from his huge arms and temples as chakra began to flow wildly around him. The man strained himself as he lifted up a giant boulder almost as tall as the walls of Konoha and as wide as a whole building. Doden. Doryu Dango, Earth Release. Sphere of Graves. That's crazy. Tenten shouted as they all scrambled away from the incoming projectile the Jirobo just threw as if it was small luggage. The earthen sphere crashed to the ground. It flattened the surface and rolled forward, leaving clouds of dust in its wake and entrenching the ground as it went farther and farther. Jirobo grinned at the destruction and havoc he had just caused as he squatted down and charged ahead like a mad bull. Shikamaru looked to his side. Kiba and Akamaru were doing fine as are Choji and Lee. Unfortunately they were not in close proximity to one another. Sakura, Neji and Tenten were not with them unfortunately. Shikamaru stood up when he felt vibrations on the ground. It even sounded like the charge of a rampaging ox and it was headed straight at them. Then through the smoke was Jirobo, wearing a dangerous and sadistic grin, promising agony and death as he looked like he was going to trample all over them. Choji then sprang into action, holding the man back with his own strength. The ground behind Choji shattered and caved in while Choji himself was skidding but maintained his ground as he stopped the orange-haired man. As if I'm going to let you harm Shikamaru. Choji shouted as he dared to push back. The older man grinned and held Choji by his shirt. Those are big words coming from a worthless piece of garbage. Then, out of nowhere, Jirobo slammed his forehead on Choji's face. The boy flinched and staggered back, his nose bloody from the impact as he held his face. Jirobo then leapt forward and landed a vicious haymaker at Choji who felt his world spin as he was sent tumbling away clearing Jirobo's path to Shikamaru. Choji. Worry about yourself first, trash. Jirobe instantly closed in on Shikamaru. The Chunin was surprised that the man was capable of such a feat of speed even though his build did not even show it. Gatsuga, fang over fang. Kiba tried to intercept the man but was suddenly blocked by a wall of earth springing up from the ground when Jirobo stomped on it. Kiba was suddenly blocked as the older man grinned who looked down on Shikamaru who was already in a handseal with his shadow already on Jirobo. The man laughed, amused by Shikamaru's desperate tactic. You've already failed at holding me down. What's the point of doing this jutsu again? To distract you. Shikamaru replied plain and simple. A large and outstretched hand was sent slamming on to him in great force. Buben Baika no Jutsu, partial multi-size expansion technique. Choji shouted. His expression was filled with contempt and a gaze that told everyone that could see that he was serious. Crash. It was then that Jirobo was slammed at the opposite side of the trench and on to the other side. Jirobo crashed to the ground and skidded back, surprised by the amount of power that the other kid possessed. When his trajectory finally stopped, he was then met with a hail of kunai coming from above. Jirobo got up and began to evade them quickly. He was then met with another kid, this time containing the eyes of the feared Byakugan. The boy danced as he moved around the hail of knives as he began to assault Jirobo. The guardian of the southern gate of Odo expertly avoided the Hyuga's deadly Jukin attacks as the older man stepped on the earth to make Neji lose balance. That had a certain effect as Neji missed the man completely before he saw a pink-haired girl jump on her shoulder with two swords brandished out in glowing blue. Sakura thrusts the two swords directly above Jirobo's head downwards. But Sakura was surprised when she felt suddenly drained a little as her sword's blue aura vanished without a trace in just less than a second before she was slammed hard on the ground with the earth caving in from Jirobo's unmatched strength. Sakura coughed out blood from her mouth. The shock of Jirobo's strength had not prepared her for the pain that he was capable of dealing. She felt some parts of her left shoulder were dislocated. She felt like a ragdoll as only the shock of being splattered on the ground registered in her mind. She could not hear the man shouting in glee as she was hoisted to the air once more by her legs and then slamming her to the ground. Dynamic entry. A straight flying kick came from Lee as he smashed his way to Jirobo's stomach, who was then sent flying and losing his grip on Sakura's leg. Sakura recovered enough of her senses to tell that she was saved by Lee, who held her on her lower back. Sakura gritted her teeth and popped her shoulder back into place as a certain green chakra glowed on her right hand that held her shoulder. She staggered back up and gave a huff as she dusted herself off. This is ridiculous. We're fighting when we're losing ground to Sasuke's captors. Unfortunately, we will need to split up or else we will never catch up and we will fail with our objectives for this mission. Neji stated, looking afar to where Lee sent their opponent to as Jirobo slowly tried to get up. Shikamaru, Kiba and Choji had managed to make their way to them and their team leader spoke up. Loath as I hate to admit it, Neji's right. We can't keep getting blocked here. Time and distance are of the essence. We need to catch up to their group before they are out of range of Neji's Byakugan or any other tracking techniques that we might have. Who said you're going anywhere? Jirobo said as he made his way towards them. Choji frowned at this and said to Shikamaru. I'll take him while you guys go. I could keep up with his strength. I can take him. Sakura then spoke up. As the medic of this team, I'm staying as well. Shikamaru looked at Sakura with a raised eyebrow. If you're thinking in the same thoughts as me, then I can be rest assured that Choji and the rest of the team are in safe hands. Just don't charge in blindly. Out of all of us, you're the one with the least combat experience. Sakura nodded as did Choji. They both understood the implications of their decisions and thought it was for the best. It was then that Shikamaru understood just how an excellent ally Sakura was now. She may have not as much offensive capabilities as Kiba and some of the more physical members of the team, but she had enough brains to figure things out on her own. Sakura was an underrated kunoichi that had been stunted by her own infatuations. Now that her crutch was gone, she was now a kunoichi that could have been able to make it to the final rounds of the Chunin exam several months ago. I promised myself that I would obtain the necessary strength to not let tragedies of the past happen again. Sakura looked at her right hand and clenched it into a tight fist, her eyes closed as she focused herself on the fight. I swore on his memory and I will fight in keeping those moments within me. Sakura then stood up as she held her swords in both her hands. This is my oath. Choji then looked at Shikamaru with a grin. Shikamaru, get going. I'm not about to let that bastard insult my friends. I'm staying behind. And you heard Sakura, didn't you? This is my promise as well. Shikamaru gave a solid nod as he looked at both Sakura and Choji before turning to the rest of his teammates. Choji didn't show it, but he was already at boiling point against Jirobo ever since he had been calling Shikamaru and his friends as trash. Choji was never one to lie down when people insult those closest to him. More than losing the last piece of food, more than anything that was enraging in the world, for the honor of his comrades to be insulted so callously like this man, it is an unforgivable sin to him. Let's go, Shikamaru said, back turned to Choji and Sakura, who was staring at the man with a scowl on their faces. Kiba then pointed to the both of them. Both of you better catch up, you hear me? Sakura smirked. I'm the medic here. I can patch you up while on the way. It's better for me strategically to be in the back to see you all alive. Don't worry. Choji and I are not planning to die here today. With that, 5 of the ninjas vanished from sight in an attempt to keep up with their pursuit. So that piece of trash has left you 2 pitiful rats to die, huh? The man smirked as both Sakura and Choji readied themselves. No matter how serious you are, you will never be able to beat me. We'll never know unless we try. Choji then grabbed a pair of ninja wire that were tied with kunai. Choji encircled them around him loosely as if it were a ream of bullets. The boy then shouted the name of the technique. Baika no Jutsu, multi-size expansion technique. The seemingly harmless loosely tied kunai around the wiring stood up as if the knives had a mind of its own and stood up, with Choji now looking to have spikes surrounding him. Is Choji planning to shred their enemy to pieces with those? He needs more help than just his rotation based from Jirobo's display of strength. To pierce through that man's grip, there has to be a force strong enough for Jirobo to cave in. Not to mention, Jirobo had the ability to absorb chakra. Her chakra blades will not work unless she uses the swords themselves, which puts her in a dangerous position and too close for the man to overpower her. She did not yet have Tsunade's legendary strength after all. Sakura began to think and her mind drew a blank. Jirobo was a little fast for his build, but certainly not incredibly fast. He has more power than speed though, and his movements were straightforward if rather slow. He wasn't tricky to figure out, that much she was certain. So they need something to bypass Jirobo's guard and let him slip up at one point or another. Then an idea hit her. Their enemy was a straightforward fighter. His moves were simple yet destructive enough to completely maim, cripple or kill with just a single blow. She had one key element that could tip the scales to their favor and she was considering it even though it was dangerous. Disable him. Hit whatever there is to hit to create an opening for Choji to finish the job. Maneuvering around their opponent would be time-consuming. Also, she was still prone to errors in judgment whenever she decides to attack. She had the agility and reflexes to perform counters. What she didn't have was a body resistant enough to the force that Jirobo could dish out, so blocking is completely out of the question for her. Sakura scowled. This was not going to be an easy battle. Then, Choji charged, spinning madly as the kunai that he surrounded himself with pierced the ground as he went straight for Jirobo. Sakura scowled at this. Without Shikamaru to direct his attacks, Choji is prone to commit the same tactics as that of their opponent. Jirobo, from what Sakura could tell, is the one who has the edge. Although not really shown, Jirobo had one thing that Choji didn't. And that was a certain level of control. The man could control his strength, adjust how much he will deal and add more if needed. So when Choji went after Jirobo, Sakura wasn't surprised when their enemy stopped the boy dead in his tracks. She was, however, impressed when Choji managed to push Jirobo back a little, drawing blood from the seemingly indestructible man. We have a shot, Sakura said as she ran towards Jirobo, swords drawn. This time, Sakura didn't go for activating her chakra blades as they would be useless for this fight. Jirobo, who was still holding Choji back, suddenly felt a stinging pain at his arms and then to his injured right leg as Choji was gaining ground with the kunai, making it dangerously close to his face. This guy would not let something outmatch him in strength. He doesn't recognize Choji's attacks as a threat. If I can cut him down and weaken him, Choji can overpower him. He's as good as dead. His pride is his worst enemy. Their enemy still hasn't recognized their strength, and seeing as it was agitating the man as Choji and Sakura kept adding on the pressure, Jirobo grew irate and raised Choji above him. Choji couldn't do anything. If he dispelled his jutsu now, he would be left vulnerable and the kunai he had wrapped around himself would be used against him. Jirobo then turned around to Sakura, who was looking at him with surprise as he punched Choji's ball form towards her with a strong and intimidating force. Sakura dodged the giant ball as she could literally feel the air that accompanied Choji as he was sent hurtling away. Jirobo was looking at her, growling as his eyes showed a rage never before present from this otherwise quiet man. You annoying pest, I'll take care of you first. Jirobo said as he growled and then charged at Sakura, paying no mind that his right leg had a deep cut that would have otherwise staggered any other person. Sakura looked on in surprise. There was no way a man like this could just maintain a certain physique even when injured. Sakura performed the Shunshin no Jutsu so she could easily get away as she jumped back. Jirobo smashed his bloody right hand down and the earth beneath him fissured and gave way. Soon, his face was now covered by the familiar black marks that appeared sporadically in the same way as Sasuke's, although the patterns of the black marks were much too different. A cursed seal user that is just like Sasuke-kun, huh? This fight just got more dangerous. Sakura could feel the sweat dripping from her brow. This was how nervous she was. Behind her, Choji slowly recovered as he felt his stomach churn from the man's strong punch. Blood seeped from his mouth as he got up. growling as the man's appearance slowly changed with the appearance of strange black marks. Just like what happened to Sasuke. Choji wiped the blood from his mouth as he went for his pouch. He looked down to see what he had grabbed from his equipment and looked at the item in his hand with trepidation. In his hand was a transparent case with 3 colored pills inside. One green, one yellow and one red, each are being contained in their own storage boxes. Choji then looked back towards Sakura, who was trying to dodge Jirobo as best to her ability and keeping away. Choji scowled as he opened the green spinach pill. I'm sorry Shikamaru, everybody. But the way things are now, I can't afford to let my fear take over me. He took the pill to his mouth and bit it. Soon, he felt his chakra reserves going back up as Choji looked on. Not when a comrade is risking her life and giving everything she has to win. I can't afford to be left behind. Choji smirked as the vision of his comrades and one particular orange-clad blonde his back against him entered his mind, wouldn't you say so? Buben Baika no Jutsu. Ude partial multi-size expansion technique. Arm. His right arm, enlarging much more than his previous attempts, swung back and rammed it towards an oncoming and powered-up version of Jirobo, who was suddenly smashed by a gigantic fist back. Jirobo, however, instead of letting such a thing affect him, simply set his foot on the ground and pushed the gigantic hand back even though several meters were lost just so he could stop the Konoha ninja's attack. Don't get cocky, trash. Jirobo stated in complete annoyance as he pulled the gigantic arm back, earning a smirk as Choji was sent back to him quick. Jirobo reared his fist back as Choji's attack is dispelled. He then smashed Choji to the ground as the boy looked on in surprise. Smash. The worst thing about it was the certainly disturbing grin that he gave off as he punched Choji to the ground. Choji. Jirobo then heard that voice and Jirobo immediately scowled as he heard a girl's voice. He turned around and saw the pink-haired girl swinging at him 2 swords downwards in an X-like pattern. Jirobo simply would not have any of that and grabbed the swords by their blades and not even a tiny bit of blood was spilled. What on earth? Sakura asked as she was then kicked in the gut by Jorubo as she was sent flying with her losing grip with her blades. Sakura skidded on the ground as she stumbled back and a minor trench appeared beneath her. Sakura coughed up terribly after that as she could feel a few of her false ribs were broken. She winced as she tried to get back up. Blood escaped from her lips but wiped it away as she got up. Jirobo was smirking at her and at Choji, who literally was under his foot. The man threw her swords away from him just halfway between him and Sakura. Trash like you being left behind means you are the weakest member of your team. You two, being at my mercy, are enough proof. To a whole team, you two are completely negligible. Sakura stood up while panting with a smirk despite the amount of pain she's in. Keep telling yourself that, you're probably a reject too, right? What? You think your projection and compensation is subtle? You've been doing that a lot since the start of our fight. The way you don't have anything else other than brute strength to deal with leftovers or bottom feeders, that right there is the epitome of sad. That seemed to rile the man up as he went after at the soon-to-be paste in his sights as he said, I'm a proud member of the Sound 4, Jirobo of the Southern Gate. You're nothing to me. Sakura didn't reply. Instead she wordlessly evaded Jirobo this time and made a break for her weapons. She got on one of her knees and held them in her hands. Her left hand holds one of her swords in a reverse grip while her other sword was resting its flat side on her adjacent shoulder. She wordlessly got up as she said to Choji. Don't worry Choji, we won't lose. I'm going to create an opening while you finish the job. Choji got up, a yellow pill in his mouth as he said with a sincere smile on his face, let's take him down. Sakura then turned to Jirobo and the rage of battle took her over like a raging fire. Her adrenaline was pumping at a fever pitch as she used an unfamiliar stance. Shinobuto, dance of death. She walked as if each step was calculation, as if she were a stalking predator. Then a few steps in, Sakura vanished via a wordless shunshin. She reappeared almost immediately right before Jirobo, who swung a fist at her. Sakura, as if she were in a dance, spun around Jirobo and redirected the man's knee with a simple tap of her sword's hilt with her left hand, thus escaping Jirobo's powerful strike. She jumped and raised her right hand and swung horizontally, intent on cutting Jirobo's neck with her other sword. The man simply leaned back as Sakura landed on the ground. She raised her left hand, sword still in reverse grip, and pushed the hilt of her blade with her right hand for a thrusting maneuver. To Sakura, in her mind, everything was vague yet very clear. It was as if her body was on autopilot. Jirobo had stopped Sakura's thrust just in time as the very tip of the blade was poking at his rotund belly. The man smirked as Sakura seemed to have come to her senses when she noticed that she had been stopped. Jirobo may have stopped the blade, but his hands bled with Sakura's thrust. But he smirked at the result. The girl clearly had the agility and the reflexes to get around his movement, but she was still a rookie prone to many mistakes, and this one proved to be fatal. Sakura took this opportunity to use her other sword to slash at the man's arms. Jirobo let go of the blade and retracted his hands back when he noticed that the girl wouldn't let up. She hadn't noticed that he had consumed some of her chakra as well. Choji watched as he could feel Sakura's animalistic instinct taking over. She was walking as if she was in a trance, and when she finally engaged Jirobo, he was surprised when she began to whittle him down, although that was soon short-lived when Jirobo had stopped her advance when he decided to once again overpower her. Seeing his chance, Choji began to mold chakra as the effect of the yellow curry pill began to take place. His chakra levels were now higher than usual. He enlarged his arms once more and swung them to his front in order to flatten Jirobo with them. Sakura jumped backwards, flipping back as Choji began his attack. Jirobo stretched his arms sideways and widened his feet in order to brace himself and stop Choji's attack at him. The Akamichi's appendages, despite their current size, were remarkably fast enough as they slammed onto the Oto Nin. Smash! There was a loud shockwave as the two forces collided. Sakura, who had been at midpoint, skidded back by the show of force. Behind her, Choji had jumped, left leg stretched above his head and enlarged as he swung it down to where Jirobo was. The axe kick shattered a good 10-meter diameter worth of land as it gave into Choji's leg. Choji didn't stop there. With momentum on his side now, the boy retracted his leg and grew his right hand large enough that it could tower a fully grown adult. With a shout, Choji threw his punch straight down once more to Jirobo, who was disoriented from Choji's crushing axe kick. Before he could do anything, a giant fist slammed onto his entire body as if he had been rammed head-on by a herd of stampeding enraged bulls. The earth caved in once more, forming now a sizable crater as Jirobo was embedded on the ground. The man, who was reeling in and realizing that he was suddenly overpowered, looked up and saw Choji not growing his limbs anymore, but instead his entire body was enlarged as he descended to the earth like an asteroid. Sakura decided it was a good time to run away as Choji decided to flatten the entire area, but Jirobo remained. He was not flinching, not even scared to say the least. He was looking at the dark shadow looming over him as Choji crashed down from above. The black marks that were on his face slowly turned red as they crossed over to his sclera and turned black. He had not anticipated that his own strength was overshadowed by such a set of brats who only had nothing but guts and wits about them. They should have been scared of his power, rattled and in despair. Yet here he was, about to be squashed by a boy who only has resolve to fight against him. That would not do. Boom. The earth shook and a shockwave was sent in all directions, with Sakura planting her swords on the ground and grabbing on to them for dear life in order to not be blown away. Choji looked down and smirked. He had never felt so relieved that the battle ended just now. He had never felt more satisfied than the fact that he had literally crushed the man who insulted and belittled them like they were gnats, and he didn't even have to resort to the third pill to do it too. Then, Choji could feel something stir beneath him. Choji's eyes widened when he could feel the entirety of his body being lifted off to the ground. I can't believe that a couple of worthless pieces of filth made me go on to the second state. There's a second stage, Sakura asked to herself as she now saw the hulking figure of a man now turned red, warts sprouting at the bald areas of his head and a pair of yellow eyes with black sclerae. Smoke wafted out of his mouth as he gave a powerful palm thrust at Choji's stomach that sent him hurtling to the sky and dispelling his jutsu. Choji! Sakura shouted as the boy fell down to the ground and rolled to the side. Choji couldn't even move at that. Sakura was now frightful of what might happen to Choji. The boy had a nasty fall, and from the look of things, the pills he had been consuming had terrible side effects to them. She was still a novice in concerning antidotes and cures for poisons. She wasn't going to be of much help if Choji continued to degrade at this rate. Were completely outmatched from the beginning. Sakura thought as she looked on towards Choji, unmoving but clearly not out cold. Her voice had attracted the attention of the currently monstrous form of Jirobo, his eyes turned to her and his smirk was ever present. Have you come to a realization? You were never a match for us in the first place. You are only a nuisance, a fly that needs swatting. Jirobo then smashed his hands together to make a point. The man then disappeared and reappeared right in front of Sakura. In this form, I can give out 10 times the power output that I'm used to. And just like that, cold and vicious fury rained down on Sakura, who barely dodged in time as she was grazed on her left shoulder by the man's huge fist that buried beneath the ground and shattering it upon impact. Sakura counterattacked, and swung her blade with her right hand. Her sword had once more made contact, but now, her swing had seemingly no effect as it stayed perfectly still on Jirobo's neck without a speck of blood being shed. His skin has gotten thicker. Don't think you can do your tricks more than once. Jirobo then sent a palm strike on Sakura's stomach and felt the shockwave hit her so fast that she had no time to register what just happened as she was flung away, swords in her hands and entrenching on the ground once more. She slowly got up, struggling but otherwise persevering. Her left arm had been badly cut from Jirobo's punch and blood seeped from her mouth as she looked down, her eyes being covered by her pink hair. We can't win. Jirobo smirked when he realized his strength had finally managed to weaken the resolve of his two opponents. Granted, they were like cockroaches, resilient to the very end. But he supposed trash always clung to a false sense of hope. Hey, after this, I'll go after your trashy leader that left you at my mercy. You were fools to rely on such an idiot to be your leader. Well, I guess idiots always attract their own kind. Jirobo raised his fist about to bash Sakura's brains out of her head when he felt something blunt and painful mashing on his gut. The man looked down and saw Choji, now emaciated to an almost unrecognizable degree, elbowing him on his right flank. Jirobo could honestly not tell how he was suddenly flung from his position as he was sent like a bowling ball to a forest of trees and proceeded to level a fourth of it into the ground. I've just had about enough of your mouth. You can insult me, fine, and I wouldn't give a damn. Choji's hand flared with chakra and butterfly-like wings made of pure chakra appeared behind his back as if it was some sort of apparition. It was ethereal, beautiful even. But how dare you insult and threaten my friends, my comrades? Choji's mouth was raised as he charged to Jirobo with fists flowing with energy. For all the pain that you've inflicted on me and all the insults that you've thrown, I'll return it to you in favor and then some. Choji knew that eating the red chili pill was their only chance left. Even if it would kill him, Choji knew that he wouldn't let this man follow through. Or else he would kill the rest of his teammates. That's why he attacked with desperation before anything was too late. He didn't know how long the effect of the pill was, but he was determined to end the fight then and there. If it failed, then the risk that he was willing to take was for nothing. Choji got within the man's range and ducked, delivering one punch to the man's gut before he jumped and delivered another vicious haymaker to the man's face. Jirobo went spinning twice before a kick sent him away crashing to the opposite side while Choji followed suit. He's gotten faster and more agile and his blows are even enough to penetrate through my skin. Jirobo thought as he skidded to the ground before he gritted his teeth out of anger. I refuse to be defeated here. Jirobo righted himself in midair and landed on the ground as he skidded back. He crouched and used his right hand to get hold of the earth beneath him as he went backwards, finally stopping as Choji went after him fast. Sakura, meanwhile, still looked down in shock as she felt all her confidence shatter into dust. But a thought had snapped her out of her own stupor just then. When are you going to stop worrying about your lack of strength and just get up? Sakura looked up, only she saw nothing as she turned around. That voice. Sakura stood up and continued to look around. I won't always be there to have your back. It was then that she felt something tap her shoulder and saw a blond boy smiling at her as he took a step forward. Come on, get out there and get to work. Sakura felt tears threatening to fall from her eyes for a second as she looked around. There was no sign of her departed teammate anywhere. She held her cheeks with both of her hands as she felt tears running down on them. That's right, I can't always hold on to your memory. You taught me to stand by my own 2 feet even if you didn't actually mean it. She smiled, tears continuing to run down her face. Thank you. For now, all that I can do to keep everyone safe. Sakura tightened the hold of her swords as she picked them up and got up while flinching. Her eyes opened up as she looked out towards Choji and Jirobo, who were duking out in the field. Is to win. Sakura vanished from her position and reappeared quickly between Jirobo and her teammate. Suddenly surprised by Sakura's second wind, Jirobo lost his balance as Sakura pounced. She encircled her opponent as Choji charged dead ahead. The two surrounded Jirobo as Sakura let out a vicious slash at the man's back and blood seeped out of them. His skin isn't tough against blades, but it was my doubt that couldn't cut him. Sakura then spun around and kneeled just as Jirobo tried to clothesline her to the face, missing her completely as Sakura slashed his left kneecap and behind it, forcing Jirobo to kneel down as Choji bombarded him with punches left and right continuously. Slash. Slam. Slash. Slam. Choji jumped back and gathered as much chakra as he could and focused everything on his right hand just as Sakura turned to face Jirobo now and one sword back in a thrusting motion. The earth shook and trembled under the immense power Choji was gathering as debris began floating all around him while Choji gritted his teeth. This is everything I have. I will put everything in this one punch. Choji thought as his right hand became surrounded by chakra as his wings disappeared and went onto his hand. Sakura gritted her teeth as she pushed forward, thrusting the sword to her front. Jirobo, in a panic, once more used both hands to block the blade in the middle. Unfortunately, Sakura did not follow through. Instead, Sakura changed the trajectory of her sword and she thrusts it downward to his injured leg. The sword pierced through his tough skin. Blood flew everywhere and some were even splashed on Sakura's face as it went through and planting itself on the ground through the other side of his leg. Jirobo roared in pain, but Sakura was not done yet. Sakura then used the other sword and thrusts it forward to where Jirobo overreached his arms and planted her sword there, pinning both forearms together and moving it back slightly, pointing to the man's neck. Soryu no Kajo, Kamitsuku, bite of the coiling twin dragons, Sakura mumbled as she jumped in time to see Choji running straight at him with right hand glowing in majestic blue chakra. Choji, finish him off. Choji shouted from the top of his lungs and punched the hilt of the sword with all of his might. The sword moves as did Jirobo's hands and tip of the blade pierced through his neck and outgoing through his cervical spine. Chouden Bakugeki, butterfly bullet bomber. A shockwave escaped behind Jugo as blood dripped from Sakura's blade that was now securely planted on Jirobo's neck. The man looked in surprise as no words escaped him. His jaw twitched for a few seconds and his eyes rolled on to the back of his head before he fell down on the ground completely lifeless. The cursed seal receded, now revealing the face once more of the man that they had just effectively killed. Sakura and Choji gave a sigh of relief as Choji plopped down on the ground, finally feeling the effect of the 3 pills. We won. Choji looked onto the sky, a smile written on his face as he gave deep breaths. Sakura approached his side, looking down on him as she kneeled and said, "Come on Choji, let's get you to Konoha. The effect of the pills must be too much for you." How did you know about the side effects? Choji asked. Sakura merely smiled and said, "A medic has to look out for anything and everything involving their teammates. If he or she can't find a single problem, then they are ineffective as medics." Sakura slung Choji's right arm just above her shoulders and looked back. "I'm sorry, but it looks like we won't be able to catch up for a while, Shikamaru." Sakura then leaps towards the treetops and made her destination back to the village. Shikamaru's team. Shikamaru looked to both his sides and clicked his tongue in frustration. Just as they were about to be caught up with their enemy again, they were stalled once more. This time, it was the one with the 6 arms who was looking at them at a fair distance. He looked towards Neji, who already finally cut himself loose, while Lee, who had not been moving for some time, caught a sharp weapon with his feet. The one with the 6 arms looked mildly impressed. "Oh. How did you get out of my webs so easily?" Neji answered by pointing to his group that were already loose from his webbing. "You have not realized it, but during our first encounter, we have already deduced your skills and the weakness of your jutsu, rendering your capturing techniques useless." Kitamaru raised one of his eyebrows and gave a slow clap. "That is impressive for a genin. It looks like I get to have some fun with your group now, seeing as that fat fuck Jirobo failed at his one job." Kitamaru gave a sinister grin and chuckled. "A fair warning though, I tend to play rough and my idea of fun may involve breaking some of my toys for a game." Neji scowled as Shikamaru and the others were now just behind him. "Leave him to me. I can deal with him faster than the rest of us." This time it was Tenten that spoke up. He specializes in long range. He's probably subpar when it comes to taijutsu, but his range is dangerous. "I can't leave you alone like that, Neji. Your skill set would benefit more against that man with the blue hair." I can get close to him and stop him from there. Neji replied, but Shikamaru contested his logic. The same could be said to you by this guy. If anything, it's Tenten who should be the main force to counter this guy. Neji smirked. Clearly, you do not know me well. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow at this. I suppose our senpais have to be vague and have an idea on how to fight this guy. If that's so, be sure to make short work. I don't want any more holding the lines here. Choji and Sakura are enough to handle their big guy. Lee turned to Neji and Tenten and gave them a thumbs up, thankful for his teammates to have set him loose. Neji, Tenten, I know that you tire from my words and speeches about youth, but I must say it again. Lee then grinned at Neji. Your fire is strong. Never let it be extinguished, both of you. One day, I will reach towards your place and then, we will have our match, Neji. Neji gave a small grin. Lee may be loud and sometimes rambunctious, but in no way was he a simpleton. On the contrary, he always applied himself whenever possible. His self-designated rival simply implied that he should not die in this place. They still had more unfinished business to do. Don't die. Kiba added in. Akamaru barked in affirmation on top of his head. Easier said than done, Konoha-nin. Kidomaru then unleashed half a dozen spiked projectiles at them. All 6 of them evaded quick enough, with Shikamaru, Lee and Kiba managing to get away via Shunshin. Neji and Tenten turned their attention back to the 6-armed man. Their grins were now scowls as Tenten craned her neck to hear it pop while Neji's Byakugan activated. Both of them were walking slowly, and just as much they began to pick up the pace. Tenten grabbed a scroll from her pouch and tossed it in midair as it spun vertically before landing on her hand. When it did touch her palm, both she and Neji disappeared from view as Kidomaru was on full alert. Neji had reappeared just to his front very quick, and a hail of knives rained down upon him in different directions. Neji jabbed 2 fingers to his chest that Kidomaru nimbly evaded as he did the same with the rain of steel that was meant to pierce him. The knives all landed and pierced the tree branch that they were standing on, with one narrowly hitting Neji on his feet. The girl is damn accurate with her weapons. That much space is enough to cause any person into a panic. Kidomaru thought as Neji quickly closed in on him with his Byakugan, pointing out the numerous tenketsu on his opponent's body. Neji pushed forward, both hands ready to strike his opponent down. This time, he aimed one on the man's upper right arm while another went to the abdomen. Kidomaru had to block both, but was surprised as this time it was Senbon that was raining down on him. The 6-armed man cursed inwardly. This was the perfect duo if there ever was one. They covered their shortcomings very well. The close-range fighter would lock him down, preventing him to move towards their long-range user, and the long-range user would provide cover for their close-quarter combat specialist to prevent him from overwhelming his opponent. Not to mention the angles in which she attacked, it was like she was on constant movement. It was then that Kidomaru decided that he should be using long-range too, as jumped back and shot out a web from the trees to swing and get as much distance between him and his opponents as much as possible. Tenten then unsealed a giant windmill shuriken from her scroll and concentrated enough chakra to it as she spun it above her head. With a mighty throw, the weapon sounded in the air like a powerful rotor chopping the atmosphere as it tore through the web-like paper and Kidomaru crashing to one of the thick branches of trees. Kidomaru rolled on to the wood as he landed with a thud and got up while gritting his teeth. He was not prepared when Neji had already caught up with him via Shunshin. You were within the range of my divination. Neji then lunged. Hake Rokuju Yansho, 8 trigrams 64 palms. Kidomaru looked up and saw Neji in a stance he was not familiar with as Neji suddenly closed the gap between them and bombarded him with precision strikes. 2 strikes. 2 points in his abdomen were hit. 4 strikes. Neji's hands worked fast as he focused on hitting Kidomaru's tenketsu. 8 strikes. Kidomaru staggered back as he was pushed backwards. 16 strikes. By now Kidomaru was at the trunk of a tree. 32 strikes. The trunk splintered, embedding Kidomaru deep in its thick bark as Neji spun around and continued to bombard Kidomaru at a blistering pace. 64 strikes. By now, Kidomaru had gone through the thick wooden trunk of a large tree and fell down to the other branch. Neji was quick to follow through and step to the other side. He was momentarily surprised when Kidomaru got up, a smirk on half of his face as something metallic shattered from it and fell to the wooden floor with a flat thud. Gold. Neji raised an eyebrow before turning back to Kidomaru, still wearing that smile of his. I guess that was your ace in the hole, wasn't it? Neji was amused that this man would think so. Certainly, that last attack was one of his strongest if not the strongest attack he had. However, it didn't mean that he was out of options. You're Jukin, I've heard some pretty nasty things concerning your style. I can't let you get close to me or have a way to access my chakra circulatory system. I made your whole taijutsu style useless. Another rain of knives soon fell down as Kitamaru looked up and didn't bother to dodge this time, seeing as his armor had protected him. Did you really think that you had a chance? It may have been troublesome, but I wanted to see what you and your teammate were capable of. Now that I saw this, I wouldn't have to worry. Neji smirked as he once more lunged forward, right hand drawn back, this time in an open palm. Kitamaru stepped back, prepared for another onslaught of strikes coming from the Hyuga prodigy. His golden armor seeped through his pores to give a protective cover to him once more as he faced Neji head-on. Neji ducked from a punch and easily slipped inside Kitamaru's guard. The guardian of the Eastern Gate had his other arm to intercept the boy, who evaded it without much loss in momentum as his hand made it all the way to his abdomen. Kitamaru was confident his armor would protect him. The chakra that the boy had in his palm wouldn't be enough to penetrate his armor. Just then, he felt a sudden jolt of pain enter his entire body as if 1,000 prickling needles pierced his skin. It gave a crackling sound as he could feel his body lost control for a second and reacted to the jolt in midair. Raiden. Ratio lightning release. Lightning palm, Neji thought as he slammed his palm on the man's stomach, causing Kitamaru to fly back and spit out blood from his mouth. What? Surprised. Unfortunately for you, your armor is made up of gold. Neji's right hand then sparkled with a streak of lightning, giving a small crackling sound. Neji then spoke in a stoic manner. Gold is a good conductor of electricity. The moment you have entered my field, you have doomed yourself against me. Kitamaru grinned. All kinds of prey say the naughtiest of words before being ensnared by me. Tenten then jumped down, unsealing a kusarigama from her scroll as she tossed the weighted chain at Kitamaru and wrapped it around his ankle. With a shout, Tenten pulled her chain back and jumped below as she spun Kitamaru around and slammed him to the ground. Tenten followed it up with 4 kunai laden with explosive notes and tossed them towards Kitamaru in quick and fluid succession. 4 kunai landed around the body as Tenten held out a single hand seal. Boom. Neji and Tenten landed on the ground, guards still up. They looked on as the debris, fire and smoke cleared. They only saw remnants of gold, scorched earth and splintered wood all around them. Kitamaru had finally room to breathe when he saw the two within his sights and smirked. Those two are too dangerous to be around if they can see me. I need to find out the weaknesses of those two before I can make an attack. He smirked as the cursed seal began to do its work. And I know just the thing. He clasped his hands together and weaved 5 hand seals before biting his thumb and slamming his hand on the branch above him. Let's see how you handle a swarm of monsters. Down below, Tenten crouched down as she grabbed a piece of gold from the ground. She raised one of her eyebrows in curiosity as she said, "Kawari me at the very last second. I never even saw him weave any hand seals." Neji scowled at this. Their opponent may not be as good in taijutsu, but he had the makings of a crafty tactician if it were to be observed. His Byakugan scanned all around him and finally noticed a huge concentration of chakra that now multiplied to several specks of blue dots in his vision, descending towards them very quick. Tenten, look above you. Neji warned his teammate. Tenten turned her attention up and saw multiple giant spiders, the size of a pet dog, descending to them like hungry predators. Their fangs were dripping with clear fluid and both of them could tell that it was most likely poison. Tenten unfurled 2 scrolls in her hands and out in the open were more than a dozen seals within them. Sushoryu, rising twin dragons. Tenten then let loose a rain of steel and iron as the weapons launched from their respective seals. Tenten looked up and saw a lot of her weapons in the air, impaling and killing multiple spiders at once. Tenten had a bead of sweat falling from her face as she looked up, and saw the never-ending swarm of spiders in sight being ruthlessly butchered by her weapons. Now, what's going to run out first? My Amigumo, rain of spiders, or your arsenal? Tenten gritted her teeth as her inventory was exponentially consumed by this situation. The second wave of spiders brought forth more and more of the creatures and her supply was depleting faster than anything. A short time later, when the second wave had stopped, Tenten looked towards her scroll and her eyes were wide in surprise. She had run out of weapons to throw. It was then that the next wave of spiders appeared, and as another surprise, a volley of golden spider stingers whizzed in the air and landed between them. Tenten growled as she ran for cover, all the while her right shoulder was impaled by said projectiles as Neji evaded and began attacking the small spiders that were descending on him and his teammate. Find our target Tenten. I will hold him down for as long as you need. This was what Neji was hoping for his teammate. Tenten knew that Neji had wordlessly put himself as the target in order to find their opponent. She twitched and silently groaned in pain as she pulled out the offending object on her right shoulder, and she took a deep breath. A few seconds later, Tenten jumped into the air and unfurled a red scroll from her pocket as she went up the treetops. Neji continued to defend himself against the swarm of arachnids that were descending on him. He had already known that they had web strings on their abdomens as they went to him. They hissed as they attacked while Neji kept slamming them with his palms. He was fortunate his hands were used to the speed of strikes he was dealing with. When another swarm had jumped to him, Neji simply turned around and expelled chakra throughout every tenketsu point in his body and spun around like a top. Hakusho Kaden, 8 trigrams whirl. The said creatures were tossed out every which way, killing them instantly with the web strings falling helplessly around him. Neji looked up once more and another wave had closed in on him instantly. The Hyuga prodigy once more relied on his Kaden to deflect the spiders. However, he soon noticed that his spin was getting weaker and weaker with every use. Neji was a very observing individual, any small changes to anything RO and he would know immediately. He noticed the web strings that were laden all across the floor with him staying virtually untouched. The strings are hindering any further movement. Neji stared up as another wave of spiders descended upon him. This time, the number was almost enough to engulf the view of the leaves atop. Neji scowled as he stared upwards. He's locking me down. The Hyuga prodigy looked within his hands, and a spark of lightning chakra escaped from them. I just have to destroy every single thing above me even without the Kaden. Raiden. Soreisho, lightning release. Twin lightning palms. Neji then went into a familiar stance and altering ever so slightly as his hands began a flurry of strikes faster than what he had shown before. Neji focused as time seemed to slow down, his Byakugan counting the enemies that were getting closer and closer, each spider about to meet its ultimate fate in his hands. Hake Rokujuyan Hari Sho, 8 trigrams, 64 needle palms. Spiders began dying at very rapid pace, the field of surging electricity from Neji's hand piercing the body any small spider within his reach, and in turn, the lightning pierced another spider with the current flying in every which way, acting as small and unstoppable spears throttling anything in its path. Up above the canopy of leaves, Kidomaru looked on in surprise as he saw the minions of his summon getting wasted even faster than before. Deciding to disrupt his opponent's momentum, Kidomaru created more weapons from his mouth and threw them downwards as his cursed seal began spreading all over his body. Not good. I'm getting too hooked into this game. 2 of the spider fang-like projectiles spun in midair before they changed direction just as Neji was about to kill the last set of spiders. Neji flinched when he suddenly felt something sharp and debilitating on his lower left flank and just above his right shoulder blade. He was almost maimed by 3 small spiders if it wasn't for his focus. Kidomaru smirked. Perhaps he had found a weakness after all. Did the Byakugan truly have a blind spot to it? He wanted to test it out, so he once more threw 3 pairs of his Kumo Nenken, spider sticky gold, and threw it out to Neji, who was now stuck by the spider web threads that he was now trying to cut out. Just then, he had noticed some of the weapons that Kidomaru threw at him were almost unnoticeable if it weren't for the edges he had seen. Surprised by this, he was not quick enough to dodge 3 of the 6 weapons and impaled him on his back in different places except for his spine. Damn, he has an idea that the Byakugan has a blind spot. He got me with that one. Neji coughed out blood from his mouth as he fell down and breathing heavily. Up above, Kidomaru grinned wickedly as the seal had fully transformed him. His long hair got even longer and changed in color from black to almost dirty white. His skin was maroon in color as he gained a third eye just above the bridge of his nose and eyes and a pair of horns on his forehead with the sclerae turning black while his irises turned yellow. Let's see you try to survive this, now. Just then, the gigantic spider summon let go from her perch on the branch and began descending at Neji at a quick pace. Kidomaru chuckled darkly, waiting to see what might happen. He was about to rejoice when an arc of light had almost hit him in one of his arms. He was utterly surprised when he felt that and looked on to where it might have come. Up above and hidden well behind the cover of the leaves, Tenten stood straight with a bow as red as blood with a hexagonal pattern each in the middle of its 2 limbs. Each hexagonal pattern had seals written on them, with the upper as written as divine, the lower written as truth, and 2 pairs of string grooves on its upper and lower limbs. The said bow was held in her right hand, standing straight as she was, with part of right pant leg torn and covering her bloody shoulder. "He's in that general area." Tenten's stone-faced look remained as she touched the supposed arrow rest, and chakra began to take shape into a formless arrow. The said object shined bright with power. She reeled her left arm back, with the 2 pairs of string grooves forming a line that lit up beautifully like a minstrel's golden shamisen string, before letting the formless arrow fly straight and true to Kidomaru's hiding spot. The spider-like ninja gritted his teeth as he set out to abandon his perch and not see the fact that Neji had just pierced his lightning-induced right palm straight up the abdomen of the giant spider queen and killing it instantly. His former hiding spot was then obliterated by another arc of light, this time destroying the upper bark of the tree that Kidomaru was hiding. The spider gave a horrifying screech as it died before vanishing in a cloud of smoke, with Neji now covered with blood and fluids from his victim. "Anytime now, Tenten." Neji said this as he pulled out the 2 bladed weapons behind his back and winced in pain. His chakra was running low and the general area was now littered with dead spiders as Neji was panting heavily. Kidomaru had found the perfect spot once more and had certainly deduced enough information to hit the Hyuga. But the long-range specialist was still nowhere to be seen. Kidomaru was cutting it close. He knew he had to finish it now, or else he would be found by the kunoichi that apparently still had a weapon hidden within her somewhere, and a powerful one to boot. Tenten panted. Sushoryu had eaten away at her chakra, but the new bow she had from the research department was just as taxing, if not even more so. It concentrated her chakra to a point it became dense and sharp enough in massive quantities before she could even let it fly. Due to this, the weapon was her last resort, as she could only fire chakra arrows with 3 shots. Granted, the bow was still a prototype, but it nonetheless had the power and the speed to be considered a worthy part of her arsenal. It was indeed fitting of its name, as her coworkers had dubbed it. Shinkyu, God's bow. Down below, Neji followed the sound of the noise of a tree falling from above, all the while asking out aloud, "Has she found our enemy?" The boy leaned on a trunk. There were still 2 golden spider-like fangs stuck on his back. Running low on chakra, he preserved every bit of his strength and focused on activating his Byakugan. "Need to find the enemy. He's still there. I can feel it." Kidomaru gritted his teeth. Now he had 2 choices. He would have to shoot down the Hyuga first and draw himself out to be targeted, or he would find his shooter first and deal with her before delivering the final blow to the taijutsu user. The second option would be a good choice, if he had set up a few web strings beforehand. But seeing as he couldn't have set up a trap in this match, he would have to risk it and draw attention from his shooter. He began molding his Kumo Nenkin, spider sticky gold, once more in his mouth and pulled out a golden longbow and arrow. His third eye kept Neji in his sights as his hands were each grabbing on to a thread of web while his legs pushed the bow down and the arrow tipped firmly just in front of the arrow rest of the bow. Kidomaru grinned. "Kumo Senkyu. Suzaku, spider war bow. Terrible split." Kidomaru then let his arrow fly, a string of web tied to its back as it went to Neji at a high speed. It was pile driving the forest floor, picking up dust and speed as it whizzed into the air at an impossible speed. The arrow head flew and turned. It was aiming for Neji's back, right to where his suspected blindside was. "Kaden, whirl!" Neji shouted, and spun once more as the arrow made contact with the Hyuga's ultimate defense. Kidomaru was surprised when Neji stopped his spin and grabbed the arrow from its stem and then to the thread before he applied his electrocuting chakra into it. The effect was instantaneous as Kidomaru was suddenly shocked and his limbs spread out, going to a temporary tonic seizure, with his muscles giving off strong spasm for a moment before he fell down from his perch as Neji gave it everything he had in his run. "Keep fighting. Push yourself and win." The Hyuga prodigy repeated this mantra in his head over and over again. He had never thought that he would be thinking of those words. He had never thought that he too, like the rest of his peers, would be tasked to overcome insurmountable odds. It was a feeling so foreign and surreal that Neji couldn't help but smirk. Neji jumped. As much as his weakened legs could take him now, he had been bleeding terribly. But it was enough to close the gap between him and Kidomaru. Neji charged his right hand with electricity once more and shoved his palm directly on Kitamaru's chest. Bzzzt. Kitamaru froze for a moment once more. The string in his mouth fell as his heart was startled by the shock introduced to him, resetting its beat, causing the conduction process going haywire. At that very moment, Tenten appeared from the canopy of leaves above, left hand drawn back, and the formless arrow flew towards Kitamaru in a straight line heading for his right eye. "You're done here." Splat. The arrow pierced Kitamaru's right eye and going through the back of his head, boring a fist-sized hole onto the back of his skull and brain. Blood and cerebral fluid splattered all around as Kitamaru fell down to the ground dead. Tenten landed beside Neji, who began to do some emergency treatment on him as she pulled out the two Kumo Nenkin weapons that were protruding to areas where his hands couldn't reach. "We won," Neji muttered with a smile on his face as Tenten replied, "I know. We should catch up with Shikamaru and the rest," Neji replied while Tenten shook her head. "No, we can do that later. Right now we need to stop your bleeding and recover our chakra." Neji gave a weak nod. Too tired to argue, right? "Don't worry, even if we're late, the other three are too tough to be taken down easily, especially Lee." Then, blissful sleep had claimed him. Somewhere in Fire Country, a fully bandaged Naruto followed a small pug in front of him as it traced the scent of their target. As they jumped from branch to branch, Naruto noticed that it was now close to midnight. Pakun looked back at the blonde, who looked at the dog back in wonder before the dog turned his head back. "We should take a breather for a few hours." Naruto's looked confused at this. "Why? I can still make it on time." Pakun shook his head. "Not in your condition, kid. Your arms are still healing. I can smell the blood coming from you, and from what I can tell, your tenketsu are still regenerating, which is an amazing feat in itself. That kind of regeneration is unheard of, even if it is just a bit faster than your average. Normally, chakra points hardly recover when they are damaged. Even so, I can't let you go into battle with that kind of injury. We should take a few hours of rest and let your tenketsu recover. Sending you out there in that condition will be suicide." Naruto gritted his teeth but just thought that he should bear with it. If he wasn't in full capacity, he would be deadweight. In that regard, Pakun was simply looking out for him out of Kakashi's orders. That had somehow made Naruto feel better. "You're getting impatient again, take a deep breath and calm yourself," Asura had advised. The boy turned to his predecessor in his mind. Ever since he had been here, the being of chakra had been very helpful. "You do this kind of thing too?" Naruto asked. Asura smiled. "To relieve tension in your body. It is one of the things my father taught me when I was younger. I was an impatient boy, so my father drilled into me on how to think under duress. It helped me with the training that both he and his disciples had given me. I believe your master has done the same, no?" By that, Asura was pertaining to Jiraiya. Naruto nodded quietly and asked again, "Oh right, he had followers. But why did you have to train with his followers too? Wasn't the training from your dad enough?" Asura simply retained his smile as a memory of a distant past crossed to his mind. The chakra being looked up and replied with melancholy escaping his voice, "I never inherited my father's prowess with ninju. I was dull and often overlooked for my older brother, you see. Father saw my struggles, yet he never turned me down. His 5 most trusted disciples saw my father's contemplation and with their wisdom, trained me in their ways and the aspect of understanding my father's complicated thoughts on ninju. How come they were never mentioned in the legends?" Naruto asked, and Asura simply gave a sigh. His 5 most trusted disciples never craved for anything but the understanding of the world. It was through their attitudes of understanding ninju that my father had dubbed them as the Godai Myoo, 5 wisdom kings. They too wanted to spread the word of ninju but also saw the duplicities of humanity, and because of that, they are wary of using my father's teachings for their potential to twist it for perpetuating warfare. All of them had understood that possibility, so that is why they chose to teach very little, and to those willing to go the distance, the 5 disciples would use harsh training methods in order for their followers to understand suffering. Over time, they began to lose followers because of it, and soon enough, they lived the remainder of their lives isolated from everyone, and the title of the Godai Myoo changed to Godai Sennin, the 5 sages. Naruto looked surprised by this. "And they trained you?" Asura scratched the back of his head in embarrassment and gave the boy a wry smile. "Well, even though they were willing to train me, I still had to undergo their trials. I almost died in every challenge that they gave me. They were strict but they had compassion. Soon enough, I understood what they were trying to teach me. That suffering is but an aspect of life, and to alleviate it, we must look further and beyond of what lies under the guise of pain and damnation. Asura couldn't help but be amused with Naruto's confused expression. The boy reminded him so much of his own youth. You will understand once you become of age, Naruto. Someday, I hope you follow in the footsteps of my father, and I would wish nothing more than to see you succeed as well. There were still many things that Asura were keeping, but those secrets will come in due time. Today was not the day for Naruto to have it yet. He was still young and still immature. Naruto woke up, eyes wide at the dark and star-riddled night sky. The moon was out in full tonight as he looked at Pakun, who was sitting on a branch just above him while he was below. The boy stood up as Pakun sniffed the air twice before turning to Naruto below. We've got company, Pakun said flatly as 3 shinobi behind Naruto dropped down from the branches above. Is that you, Blondie? Why is your face covered with bandages? Your hair's longer too. There's been some nasty rumors concerning about you since we got there. People said you were dead. That familiar voice made Naruto turn around. He looked at a set of familiar faces and gave them an eye smile. What are you guys doing here? Back up, the other one replied. It was flat and monotonous but certainly not hostile. Behind them, another blur followed suit. His features remained relatively unknown as he moved at a much faster pace. Naruto looked at his arms. They were healing slowly and he could feel his chakra trying to mend his arms. He just hoped that he would be of use if there was going to be a battle. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe for the next video as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists. Hope you would like them too.